Chapter 284. Using his identity as an embassy staff, the counselor temporarily sent away the Miami police guarding the door. He pushed open the door of the ward and walked in. As soon as he entered, the strong smell of disinfectant entered his nose. "Uncle Zhao, you have to avenge me." At this time, Qin Fan, who was lying on the bed and sulking, heard the sound of the door opening. He saw who came in at a glance. His eyes lit up and he shouted loudly, "Revenge? What revenge? Don't forget why your father asked you to come to the United States. This is Miami, not the imperial capital. You can do whatever you want." Looking at Qin Fan in front of him, Counselor Zhao said angrily, "Ah." Hearing Counselor Zhao's words, Qin Fan couldn't help but be speechless. He often forgot that he was no longer in China, but abroad. No matter how powerful his family was, they couldn't reach the United States. Take it as a lesson this time. It's useless to get beaten up. If you sue the other party, at most they will be detained for a few days, and then come out to do community service for a few days. After all, you guys started it first. Sigh, it's really shameful. You guys started it first, but you haven't beaten anyone. Seeing that Qin Fan was silent, Counselor Zhao walked to his bed and looked down at him condescendingly. A trace of disgust flashed in his eyes. If it weren't for the kindness of this guy's father and the fact that his family was still in China, he really didn't want to talk to him. The best ending for this kind of second-generation rich kid was to eat peanuts in China. "Uncle Zhao, I can't. I've never been wronged like this in my life. No matter what, I can't take this lying down." Qin Fan couldn't take it anymore when he heard that Counselor Zhao wanted him to swallow his pride. After all, he had never been wronged like this. He couldn't take it lying down. You have to swallow it even if you can't. Otherwise, you'll be sent back to China. Now, the video at the beach shows very clearly that it was your people who made the first move. You should be thanking the gods that they didn't kill you. If you returned to China, you would be dead by now. Hearing Qin Fan still shouting, Counselor Zhao's face became even uglier. Does this guy think I'm here to play? Why don't we buy that video? Then we can sue him, right? Qin Feng's expression changed when he heard Counselor Zhao's words. Even though he was the one who made the first move, it was impossible for him to admit defeat just like that. Do you know how big of a crime it is to change evidence and bribe witnesses in America? If you want to die, don't drag me down. I've said what I wanted to say. You'd better stay here and recuperate. Once you've recovered, go to Panama and never come back. After glaring fiercely at Qin Feng, Counselor Zhao was no longer in the mood to continue chatting with him. With a wave of his hand, Counselor Zhao left Qin Feng's ward, leaving behind Qin Feng with a sinister expression on his face. Regardless of what the natural-born dragon wanted to do, Jiang Hai and the others rested for the night. The next morning, they drove to the Medical Research Institute mentioned by Shanti Clive. After all, this was the reason why Jiang Hai and the others had come here. However, on the way, Jiang Hai kept feeling that yesterday's incident wouldn't be resolved so easily. "Are you still worried about that person from yesterday?" Marian, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, asked Jiang Hai quietly when she saw Jiang Hai's expression. Actually, after yesterday's incident, everyone in the car wasn't too calm. That guy suffered such a big loss. According to my understanding of those rich people in Huaxia, they won't just let it go. Hearing Marian's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile as he drove. This is America. It's not a place where they can do whatever they want. Jiang, aren't you overthinking things? Although Jiang Hai and Marian's voices weren't loud, Aphrodite, who was sitting behind Jiang Hai, heard it clearly. She couldn't help but lean forward. A pair of slender arms gently wrapped around Jiang Hai's neck, pulling herself as close to Jiang Hai as possible, and said softly, "Yeah, I'm just afraid that these guys won't play by the rules." Hearing Aphrodite's words, Jiang Hai also rubbed his eyebrows. "Although I don't know how things will develop, Jiang, you can ask your wife. Didn't she say that she is still very powerful in Huaxia? Check this guy's background. Didn't you teach us that only by knowing yourself and the enemy can you win 100 battles?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delian, who was in the back, also said at this time. When he heard what she said, Jiang Hai remembered that it wasn't like he didn't have anyone in the country. In fact, Jiang Hai is still not used to asking others for help when something happens. Compared with asking others, he is more inclined to solve it himself. But now, Daliana's words reminded him that asking Qili shouldn't be considered as asking for help, right? Jiang Hai immediately picked up the Bluetooth headset in the car, found Qili's phone and dialed it. There is a 13-hour time difference between the eastern United States and China. It's now 8 o'clock in the morning for Jiang Hai, and it's already 9 o'clock in the evening for China. Qili, who had been busy all day, has returned home. In recent days, she has been very busy, but her life is very fulfilling. First, because she temporarily solved the problem with Jiang Hai. Second, because she found a good way to attack her opponents. Seeing that her Western restaurant is gradually being renovated, she has begun to look for a chef, and she also feels that her family seems to be getting more and more anxious. Today, she returned home after a busy day. Looking at this school district house in the second ring road of the imperial capital, which is envied by countless people, Qili didn't feel anything. The empty house really lacks the feeling of home. Although it's smaller than Jiang Hai's house, it's also less lively than Jiang Hai's house. Should I also raise some small animals? Forget it, I won't come back for a long time when I'm busy. When I come back, it will have become a mummy. Helplessly lying on the sofa, Qili laughed at herself. To be honest, she really likes the life in Jiang Hai's house. There is no pressure. She breathes fresh air every day. When she is free, she can go to the beach to bask in the sun, she can go horseback riding, she can go fishing. If she wants to go shopping, she can drive directly to Boston, where there are the most complete brands in the world. She can buy whatever she wants, and it's also cheap. She eats the best ingredients, top beef, huge lobsters, and nutritious deep-sea fish. Moreover, Jiang Hai is still making wine recently. When the time comes, she can drink a glass of wine produced in her own manner. This kind of life is very beautiful. Unfortunately, she didn't see through Jiang Hai earlier. If she didn't know in Zhongwu, but Jiang Hai, then she wouldn't be able to see through him. If she and Jiang Hai were in the United States now, they would live very well and comfortably. Just as Qili recalled that night, when Jiang Hai held her away from the mountain lion, her heart jumped for no reason, and a trace of red slowly climbed to her face. But at this moment, a mobile phone ringtone interrupted her thoughts. Originally, she thought it was a work problem, but she didn't expect to look down and find that the person who called was the one she was thinking about just now. Is this telepathy? Looking at the name flashing on the screen, Qili gently bit her lips, but she still picked up the phone and put it to her ear. Hello? Jiang Hai? It's so late, why did you think of calling me? As the saying goes, what you think is reflected in your words. Now Qili's voice is indeed much softer than usual. Jiang Hai on the other side of the phone can't help but be stunned. Nothing, are you sick? After a while, Jiang Hai asked in a low voice on the other side of the phone. Oh no, I'm just a little tired. Recently, I have been busy with the decoration of the Western restaurant. Upon hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili also realized that her state was not quite right, so she immediately patted her face and returned to her original state. Oh, since you are tired, then I won't disturb you anymore. I just came to ask you something. Do you know a second generation in China named Qin Fan? Hearing Qili's words, Jiang Hai asked her, Qin Fan? Why do you mention him? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili froze for a moment. In her mind, there appeared a sloppy guy who thought that the heavens were the boss and he was the boss. This is the case. I brought Delina and the others to Miami for treatment. Hearing Qili's curious words, Jiang Hai briefly explained the story. Of course, he wisely avoided the part where he put on sunscreen. He didn't want to talk about it. Miami? He escaped to that place? This Qin Fan is indeed a second generation in Huaxia, a very famous second generation, but recently, his situation is not very good. Hearing that Jiang Hai beat this guy up, Qili felt a little relieved in her heart. This Qin Fan actually had some grudges with Qili and the Qi family. The grudge with the Qi family was because Qin Fan's father was originally a superior figure in the Yin family, so the Qi family and Qin Fan were enemies. The grudge with Qili was naturally because of Qili's beauty. This guy appeared in front of Qili more than once, wanting to show off his arrogance. Fortunately, although he was retarded, he was not retarded to the point of having any bad intentions towards the president of a company with a market value of tens of billions, especially when Qili didn't go to bars and didn't have any bad habits. But this didn't stop Qili from hating him. Now that she heard that Jiang Hai beat him up, Qili was very happy. Then she told Zhang Hai what she knew. Hearing Qi Li's introduction, Zhang Hai was stunned for a moment. It seemed that this Qin Fan was indeed not a good person. But at the same time, he relaxed. At least this guy couldn't find trouble with him in the government. Chapter 285. This man named Qin Feng's father was Qin Tian, a high-ranking official in the imperial city. He was considered one of the top second-tier leaders in the country and held real power. Qin Feng, on the other hand, was a famous hedonist in the imperial city. Half a month ago, he ran over someone with his car. The other party's family was quite powerful. If he didn't settle the matter privately, he would have to pay with his life. Qin Tai and used his connections to escape. This was why he chose Miami instead of Los Angeles. It was easier to escape from Miami. Miami was located in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, the Sargasso Sea and the Caribbean Sea. He could easily go to any country from here. The lawless Mexico, Cuba, the Bahamas, and even further, the countries in South America could be visited. It could be said that it was a place where he could attack or retreat. Now, he had only been in the United States for 2 days, and he was causing trouble again. This time, he was causing trouble for Zhang Hai. But soon, he wouldn't be able to pull it off because Qi Li also had a grudge against him. Although Qi Li couldn't reach that far, it wouldn't be a problem for her to inform Qin Tai En's enemies in the country. As long as they caught Qin Tai En, they might be able to get some information about Qin Tai En. At that time, it would be a heavy blow to the En family. Zhang Hai wasn't good at scheming. He was famous for being naive. Since Qi Li was willing to take over this matter, it was the best outcome for him. Zhang Hai put down his worries and hung up the phone. He continued to drive to the place Xueqi Clive told him about. After driving for about half an hour, a large white building appeared in front of him. It should be here, Zhang Hai muttered to himself as he looked at the address Xanthi told him. From afar, he saw a sign hanging on the building's outer wall. On it was a string of English words, Bernice Health Clinic. However, Zhang Hai knew that although it was called a clinic, it didn't usually treat patients. Most of them were doing research here. The main research direction was towards a disease that was claimed to be incurable, albinism. Although albinism still couldn't be cured here, there had been a lot of research results. At least albinos could live like normal people without exposure to the sun. This was a great progress. Of course, although the study of albinism was the most important, it was also very authoritative about other medical problems. Otherwise, SH-20 Clive wouldn't have recommended Zhang Hai to come here. The car quickly arrived at the front of the research institute. As the car steadily stopped in the parking lot of the research institute, Zhang Hai and the 10 girls got off the car and walked towards the research institute. "What can I do for you?" Seeing Zhang Hai walking over with a group of young and beautiful beauties, the security guard here couldn't help but be a little surprised. This was a place to see a doctor, not a beauty contest. What were these guys doing here? "We're here to see a doctor. I've already called Dr. Bernice here." Hearing the security guard's words, Zhang Hai also said politely. Hearing Zhang Hai's explanation, the security guard was still a little uncertain. So he asked Zhang Hai to wait here for a while. After he went back to make a phone call with the internal line, he asked Zhang Hai to wait for a while. About 10 minutes later, a woman came out of the research institute. This woman looked only 24 or 25 years old. She was definitely younger than Zhang Hai. She was obviously Asian. She didn't wear makeup on her face, but she wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. Her long hair was meticulously combed behind her head and tied into a ponytail. There was no expression on her face. Except for coldness, there was only coldness. She wore a white coat and a pair of high heels. When she walked, she really had a strong aura. However, when Zhang Hai saw her, he unexpectedly found that this person seemed to be a little familiar. However, this feeling only lasted for a moment. In his eyes, he felt that he looked familiar. It was very likely that it had been too long since he had seen an Asian. This could be a kind of misperception, just like how Huaxia people did not look much when they saw foreigners. And the reason why Asians looked similar to Asians was one of the reasons. So he didn't care. However, when this woman saw Zhang Hai, she was also stunned for a moment, and her face flashed with deep doubts. "Hello, my name is Zhang Hai. You must be Dr. Bernice. We just talked on the phone." Seeing the doubts on this woman's face, Zhang Hai didn't say anything. After all, he had something to ask of her. He took the initiative to walk over and shook hands with her. "Hello, Mr. Zhang. Sandy has already told me about you. Let's go in now. There are a lot of things to check, so we have to hurry." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Bernice also calmed down. She didn't introduce herself, but continued to speak to Zhang Hai in English. Then she led Zhang Hai into the research institute. However, when she turned her head, the puzzled expression on her face became even more intense. Although the woman's tone was a bit cold, Zhang Hai didn't care. After greeting the girls, he walked into the research institute. After walking in, he discovered that this place was really big. Moreover, almost all of the products here were cutting-edge technology. The ground of this research institute was divided into two parts. There were normal walking paths on both sides, but in the middle, there was a flat rolling ladder, just like an airport rolling ladder. In front of each department, there was a stop point for people to walk. This was convenient for people who couldn't walk very well. In addition, the walls on both sides were not like the reinforced concrete walls of ordinary hospitals. Maybe the main body was like this, but outside the walls, there was an integrated LCD touchscreen, showing different things. For example, the research topic of this research institute, all the doctors, nurses, security guards and patients living here, and the situation at each time. In addition, there was an overall map. On the ceiling, some pictures were constantly being played, such as fields, grasslands, sunlight, and so on. After all, many of the patients here had never seen sunlight before. As soon as he walked in, this research institute gave Zhang Hai a special surreal feeling, as if he was watching a sci-fi movie. If Zhang Hai felt this way, then there's no need to mention the feeling he gave to Daliana and the others. When these girls walked in, their eyes never left the wall. Along with Bernice, they stepped into the middle elevator and walked forward slowly. Along the way, Bernice might be thinking about something, or she might not be good at communicating with others, so she almost didn't make any sound. As for Zhang Hai and the others, they had no time to communicate with her, because they were still studying the technology here. "We're here." After walking in the elevator for about 2 minutes, Bernice, who was in the front, said her first sentence. Then she walked down from a gap in the elevator. Zhang Hai and the others naturally followed her and walked into the room next to the gap. As soon as he walked in, Zhang Hai's mouth couldn't help but make a wow sound. This was because at this time, in front of him was a completely white space, just like the white in the movies. It was pure white from the ceiling to the floor to the middle to the walls. Everything was white, there was no other color. In addition, there was only one machine in this room, plus 2 people. These 2 people were obviously doctors here. At this time, they were recording something. Hearing the sound, they couldn't help but turn their heads. After seeing Bernice, they nodded to her. "We have a total of 6 tests today. Here is a blood test, a full set of biochemical tests, an ultrasound, chest X-ray, ear, nose, and throat examination, which are the most important ones. Also, internal medicine and surgery. Although you were recommended by Sandy, I also have to think about the reputation of our center. These girls must be very healthy. Then I will give you the certificate you need." Looking at Zhang Hai, Bernice said coldly. It was obvious that she wasn't discussing with Zhang Hai, nor was she explaining to Zhang Hai. She was just giving orders. This was her place, and Zhang Hai didn't care about doing these things. It was also good for these girls to have a physical examination, so he just nodded and said to the girls behind him. Hearing that they were going to draw blood, the girls were more or less afraid. But after all, these people were not young, so they didn't need to be scared like children. Moreover, the blood was drawn by machine, so it was very safe and there was no pain, so it didn't matter. Soon, the girls' blood samples had been drawn, and the 2 doctors here began to get busy. After Bernice told them, she took everyone out of the pure white room and went to the other side to do an ultrasound. This room was almost the same as the one in the room. It was also pure white, but the doctors changed from male to female. Although in the eyes of doctors, there was no difference between male and female patients, in the eyes of patients, there was a difference between male and female doctors. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Bernice arranged all the doctors to be female doctors this time. After the ultrasound, they would do the chest X-ray. After the chest X-ray, they would do the ear, nose, and throat examination. The most important thing here was to check the throat. After this examination, The internal medicine and surgery were actually not a big deal. Although they didn't need to line up or wait along the way, it was already past 12 o'clock when they finished all the examinations. Chapter 286. It's noon now. Why don't I treat you to a meal? The examination had been in progress. Unknowingly, it was already past 12 o'clock. Seeing that the last examination was over, Zhang Hai still needed to wait here for the results of the examination to come out. So he thought for a while and said something to Bernice in front of him. At the same time, he took out his mobile phone and prepared to order takeout. Of course, Zhang Hai's so-called takeout naturally couldn't be ordinary takeout. He was going to order it at the hotel where he lived. No need. We have a cafeteria here. The food is not bad. If you are interested, you can try it together. Before Zhang Hai finished speaking, Bernice had already rejected Zhang Hai's proposal and said faintly. He doesn't know why, but this Bernice always seems to have a trace of hostility towards Zhang Hai. Oh then okay. After listening to Bernice's words, Zhang Hai couldn't say anything, so he nodded with a smile. Then a group of 11 people, led by Bernice, took the rolling ladder and came to a huge room. Far away, Zhang Hai smelled the aroma of food here. Obviously, it was the time to eat here. Following Bernice, Zhang Hai and others quickly walked into this hall. This hall was the cafeteria of this diagnosis and treatment center. It looked no different from an ordinary cafeteria. There were several windows, one for dishes, one for rice, one for porridge, one for desserts and drinks. It was just that the people eating here, in addition to the doctors and nurses here, there were also patients here. Zhang Hai looked around. In addition to the room being white, the tables and chairs were all white, and the staff were all dressed in white. The patients here were also dressed in white. They were all wearing white hospital gowns, and their skin was whiter than the whitest white people. At the same time, they also had white hair. Each and every one of them looked just like the snow elves in a fairy tale world. They blended perfectly with the scenery around them. Feeling that someone had walked in here, these people's eyes looked at Zhang Hai and others immediately. When they discovered that Zhang Hai and the others were actually ordinary people from the outside world, their eyes revealed a trace of curiosity. Zhang Hai was also sizing up these people. He didn't know if it was because this institution was established relatively late, or it could be because the treatment here was expensive, so the older people no longer wanted to come here for treatment. Therefore, the patients admitted here were not very old. The older ones were in their 20s, and the younger ones looked like they were in their teens. Generally speaking, albinism did not affect one's lifespan, but they could not come into contact with the sun outside. Therefore, generally speaking, people with this disease would definitely look a little different from ordinary people, such as their eyes. However, it was unknown if it was because of Bernice's treatment, but the children's eyes were as bright as normal people's. If there was a difference between them and normal people, it would be that there was no trace of blood on their faces. They were just like vampires in movies. They had white hair, white skin, and aside from their mouths, eyes and eyebrows, there was no other color on their bodies. They looked a little scary. Let's go. But obviously, Bernice didn't care about this. She waved to the people in front of her, motioning them to continue eating. Then she said to Zhang Hai. Several people picked up the trays and went to the windows and began to eat. Although this environment was a bit strange, Zhang Hai and others still sat there and ate with peace of mind. Because the food here was really good. Not to say that it was comparable to a top-notch restaurant, but at least it was not worse than the buffet of a 4-star hotel. It seems that Bernice has put a lot of effort here. Mr. Zhang Hai, with all due respect, do you really have confidence in these children's diseases? Bernice ate quickly and not much. She ate quickly because this was the habit of a doctor, a good doctor. They don't have too much time to waste on eating. She ate less because she was still a woman, a beautiful woman. It was inevitable for her to take care of her body. After eating, she asked Zhang Hai, who was in front of her. Hey, you may not know, our Chinese medicine is extensive and profound. Diseases like natural deafness and muteness can be cured easily. Zhang Hai doesn't know how to explain. This woman looks like an Asian, but from the beginning, she has been speaking English to Zhang Hai. She might be an Asian, or someone from other Asian countries, so Zhang Hai just casually talked about it. I'm also from Huaxia. Do you think this is credible? But unfortunately, sometimes a slap in the face comes so quickly. As soon as Zhang Hai's voice fell, Bernice spoke in pure Mandarin and said to Zhang Hai. Hee. But in fact I did cure them. Hearing the other party's words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile a little awkwardly. It's useless to put on any scientific reasoning now. Stubbornness is the only way. I hope your medicine didn't leave any damage to them. Otherwise, I won't do this report. Bernice looked at Zhang Hai. Since Zhang Hai wasn't willing to explain, then she didn't say much. She wasn't a person who liked to probe into other people's hearts, but this wouldn't make her change her principles. Later on, if there was really no problem with the children's bodies, then she would still release the report. But if there was any problem, then she wouldn't release the report. She would even consider calling the police. Hearing Bernice's sharp words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile brightly. It seemed like this woman wasn't easy to deal with. However, although Zhang Hai's face was a little embarrassed, his heart didn't have any fluctuations because he was quite confident in his own aura. Although this confidence has no scientific basis, sometimes science can't explain everything. The meal was already a little dull to begin with, and this time, it was even duller. The other 10 girls, because of some worries in their hearts, didn't eat much. The only one who was not affected may be Zhang Hai. He still ate and drank as usual. He ate 2 servings in a row before he was full. After eating, Bernice took Zhang Hai and others to the living room, but maybe because there were really no foreign patients here, less than 10 minutes after they arrived in the living room, a male doctor came in with a stack of test results. Bernice, these are the test results of these girls. Looking at Bernice, the male doctor had a trace of tenderness in his eyes. This man looks to be about 30 years old, about 1.8 meters tall, with a strong body, but not strong. He wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses and looked like a gentle beast. Well, in Zhang Hai's eyes, there were only 4 kinds of men. One was uglier than him, and the other 3 were better looking than him. If they weren't beasts, then they were sissies, and if they weren't gangsters, then they were beasts. Of course, if he had a good relationship with these people, then he wouldn't mind becoming friends with them. But ridicule was indispensable, and this person was obviously within his ridicule range. Oh, thank you, Dr. Maud. But obviously, Bernice ignored the man's gaze, took the report in his hand, and flipped through it, which made the man a little embarrassed. Ahem. I don't know if you are free tonight. I happen to have 2 movie tickets for Women's Federation too. If you are interested. Seeing that Bernice ignored him, the doctor named Maud seemed to be used to it. He took out 2 movie tickets from his pocket and asked Bernice in front of him with some anticipation. Sorry, I'm not interested in movies. Unfortunately, Bernice did not let him finish his words and rejected him very straightforwardly. Oh, I also feel that movies don't have much meaning. Why don't we go watch a show? I booked a place in the outer hall of Versailles. I heard that you like to eat the willa there. After we finish eating, we can go watch the killer whale show. Obviously, this doctor named Maud would not give up so easily and continued to speak. However, it was destined that this oriental beauty named Bernice in front of him did not have any feelings for him. She closed the report and said softly, Sorry, I still have work tonight. If you really booked a place, you can try to find someone else. Hearing Bernice reject him so clearly, the doctor named Maud could not help but smile awkwardly. The most important thing was that Zhang Hai and the others were beside him. He could not change his image, so in the end, he just nodded to Zhang Hai and the others and left. After this person left, Bernice also handed the report to Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai took the report and looked at it. The data of the physical examination was very comprehensive. His body, weight, and age were naturally included. Below that were blood lipids, blood pressure, blood sugar, X-rays, chest X-ray photos, comments from internal medicine and surgery, uric acid levels, biochemical results, and so on. Everything was included. Zhang Hai looked at the data in front of him and couldn't help but nod to himself. The bodies of these girls were almost in the healthiest state. This was also what Zhang Hai was most satisfied with, especially the throat. There was almost no damage there. The vocal cords, trachea, esophagus, everything was perfect. It turned out that Zhang Hai's aura was indeed too strong. Here's $2 million. Thank you for your help. I'm donating it to your clinic. Since there was no problem with the report, Zhang Hai also knew that there was no problem with the proof he wanted. So he smiled and took out a check that he had prepared long ago and handed it over. In the United States, bribery was not accepted. But if it was just a donation, then it didn't matter. Take your money back. I'm not short of money. I promised to help you because of Sandy's problem. But don't you think there's something wrong with it? Looking at the check handed over by Jiang Hai, Bernice said faintly. What's the problem? Aren't they very healthy? Pointing to the data on the report, Jiang Hai was a little confused. What's going on? It's precisely because they are too healthy that there's a problem. Pointing to the report, Bernice's eyes narrowed. Chapter 287. If I remember correctly, Sandy told me that the original life of these girls was extremely hard. They were forced to engage in some professions that were very damaging to their bodies in order to make a living. I didn't mean anything wrong with what I said. That's why I agreed to check them. Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled eyes, Bernice said faintly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also understood what Bernice meant. Now these girls are too healthy. After all, these girls have been engaged in those professions before. Malnutrition is inevitable. At the same time, there must be viruses or internal injuries in their bodies. Their internal organs have been damaged for so many years. It is impossible for them to recover like this in just half a year. If Jiang Hai's Chinese medicine really only cured the throat, then it's okay, but Jiang Hai's so-called Chinese medicine cured all the diseases, which is a bit abnormal. Chinese medicine can cure the throat, can also cure the diseases of the internal organs, can also cure gynecological diseases, and even have the effect of repairing the membrane? I think it's difficult to convince myself with Chinese medicine, so I think I need an explanation. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of her, Bernice said word by word. Such an abnormal thing is really strange to her. If I say that the reason why they are well is because they worship many gods, and the gods naturally bless them, I don't know if you believe it or not? Shrugging his shoulders, there were some secrets that Jiang Hai would never speak of in his lifetime. Now, he regretted coming here. I don't believe it. Looking at Jiang Hai's expression, Bernice shook her head and her tone was very firm. If you don't believe it, then I can't help it. It seems that we are destined to go back disappointed today. Let's go. Seeing Bernice's appearance, Jiang Hai knew that this guy can't be convinced, so he shrugged. Jiang Hai said softly, then left the room with these girls, stepped on the elevator, and walked in the direction of the door. At this time in this room, the doctor named Bernice had some entanglement and hesitation on her face. To be honest, as a doctor who advocated science, the thing she could not accept the most was the supernatural. However, Jiang Hai's current situation could not be explained by science. It was as if these girls had changed into another person. Her testing organization was the most authoritative and comprehensive testing organization. She was certain that the bodies of these girls did not look like they had just recovered from a serious illness. Instead, they looked like they had received good education since young and had always maintained their health. After all, these people's physical conditions were almost the same as those of medically perfect people. This was what puzzled her the most. However, Jiang Hai didn't tell her. Furthermore, because she had promised Sandy, she wouldn't tell anyone else about this secret. At this moment, she was in a dilemma. All these things that went against common sense made her, a medical scholar, very interested in studying them, but she couldn't. Troublesome. Weakly pulling at her hair, Bernice whispered. Don't forget my original intention of studying medicine. Sitting on the chair behind her, Bernice whispered in a low voice. At this time, Jiang Hai had already left the institute, but the expression on his face was not very good. It was understandable, after all, his main purpose of coming here was not achieved. He came here to let these girls talk and live normally in the future. However, it seemed that this was not an easy thing. If he had known, he would have gone to other places directly. Jiang, what are we going to do now? Just when Jiang Hai was a little upset, Daliana gently pulled the corner of his clothes and asked Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Indeed, he had no plans today. Where do you want to go? Looking at Daliana and the others in front of him, Jiang Hai asked them. We weren't full just now, let's go eat. As soon as Jiang Hai asked for their opinions, Hilda Leonard immediately shouted. This girl usually eats a lot, and now she is indeed a little hungry. Well, let's get in the car first, and then find out what's delicious in Miami. As soon as he heard them talking about food, although Jiang Hai was not hungry, He was obviously more interested in eating. In his opinion, only eating can heal the trauma in his heart. Immediately, everyone returned to the car, and Zhang Hai also took out his mobile phone to check. Miami is located at the junction of South and North America, and it is also the estuary of the Caribbean Sea, the estuary of the Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic Ocean, the entrance to the ocean, so the seafood here is also the main cuisine. However, the difference was that there were a lot of flavors here. Most of them were Latin American flavors. Most of the official languages here were actually Portuguese and Spanish, not English. But just like Western cuisine, Latin American cuisine has a clear division. The Western cuisine that the Chinese speak of is actually a general term. French cuisine is Western cuisine, Italian cuisine is Western cuisine, German cuisine, English cuisine, and even Czechoslovak cuisine are all Western cuisine. The Latin American cuisine here is also the same. Cuban cuisine is Bolivian cuisine. Brazilian cuisine is Brazilian cuisine, Argentinian cuisine, Chilean cuisine, and so on. It can be said that all kinds of dishes are Latin American cuisine. But in fact, if you divide them in detail, the taste is different. According to the internet, the restaurant with the highest ranking is called Key West, but instead of a restaurant, it is better to say that it is a vacation island. West Reef Island is the general name of these islands. This place was a small group of islands to the west of Miami. Not only was there delicious food on the islands, but the most important thing was the beautiful scenery. However, it would take more than half an hour to reach it by driving along Route 1 from Miami. Tickets are needed to enter. Although the tickets are not expensive, they cost money to see the sea view. Obviously, it is meaningless for Zhang Hai and the others. After all, they don't need to see this kind of entertainment. The second place is a small stone bar called Jones's, which is not far from where Zhang Hai and the others live. There are all kinds of seafood platters and so on. The barbecue is very good, but Zhang Hai and the others are not very interested in seafood. Next is a restaurant called Versailles. Zhang Hai remembered that the man made an appointment with a female doctor at this restaurant, so Zhang Hai can't help but pay more attention to it. It is said that this is a Cuban restaurant. The taste is very good, and the price is not very expensive. But because it is full, there may be a line when it is time to eat. Seeing such a review, Zhang Hai is more interested. Cuban food, to be honest, he really hasn't eaten it. Let's go to eat Cuban food. Pointing to the restaurant's information on his mobile phone, Zhang Hai said to the people behind him. When they heard Zhang Hai's words, everyone nodded. In fact, to be honest, they haven't eaten there. Now that they heard Zhang Hai say that they are going to eat Cuban food, they are actually very interested, so everyone drove directly to this place. After arriving here, they found that although it was already past 1 o'clock, there were still a lot of people here. Zhang Hai and the others deliberately shared a table because there were so many people, but after the dishes were served, Zhang Hai and the others were very happy. The food here is mainly divided into two kinds, order and buffet. Zhang Hai and the others naturally came to both. Cuban food looks very ugly, really ugly, but the taste is not bad. Because there is a lot of sugarcane in the secret recipe of Cuba, basically all the dishes have a trace of sugarcane sweetness. People who like to eat spicy or salty food may not be able to stand the taste, but people who like to eat sweet and sour food will feel good. Zhang Hai's taste is actually based on the taste of women and children. He likes to eat sweet and sour food. So he feels that the food here is very good. After eating, Zhang Hai and the others went back to the hotel to rest. After such a busy day, although there is no result, Zhang Hai and the others are too lazy to wander around here. Although Moses Adams had a lot of fun last night, he got up early this morning to deal with Zhang Hai's case. The reason why Zhang Hai always uses this guy is that this guy can distinguish between work and personal affairs. He would never do anything for personal reasons. This was also one of the things that Zhang Hai valued the most. Once he was given a task, he would definitely complete it. After a good night's sleep in the hotel, Aphrodite and the others tacitly came to Zhang Hai's suite after dinner. Using the excuse that this was the largest room, it was very comfortable to watch TV here. Therefore, Zhang Hai's side was surrounded by a lot of women, and there was also a huge part that directly attacked the line of sight. Zhang Hai suddenly thought of the girl at the front desk downstairs. Can I call for special service tonight? Just as Zhang Hai is thinking about this, there is a sudden knock on his door. When Zhang Hai heard it, he struggled to stand up from these legs and upper body and went to the door to open it. But the moment he opened the door, he couldn't help but be stunned, because the person in front of the door is not someone else, but Bernice he just saw today. At this time, her face is as cold as it was during the day, just standing there and looking at Zhang Hai. What's the matter? Seeing her, Zhang Hai can't help but ask in surprise. He really didn't expect her to come. I can give you a certificate, but I don't need money. I need you to do me a favor. Looking at Zhang Hai, she said seriously. Chapter 288. Wow, the scenery here is really different from where I came from. Leaning against the window of the car and looking at the scenery passing by on both sides, Doliana couldn't help but shout excitedly. Although the other girls didn't shout, it was obvious from their expressions that they were in the same mood. Last night, Bernice came to Zhang Hai's hotel in person. Of course, she didn't come here to have fun with Zhang Hai. Instead, she came here to discuss with Zhang Hai. She wouldn't tell Zhang Hai's secret, and Zhang Hai didn't have to tell her either. She could write a certificate for Zhang Hai. She didn't need money, but she needed Zhang Hai to help her cure a person. She would pay for the treatment in full. She didn't care how Zhang Hai cured her, as long as Zhang Hai could cure her. After listening to her words, Zhang Hai was a little hesitant, because he was also afraid that his Reiki would leak out. But he couldn't really go back empty-handed. Moreover, if she really wrote a certificate for him, it meant that he owed her a favor. Under such circumstances, it was reasonable to do her a favor. After finalizing the deal, she went to Zhang Hai's place in a month's time. Then, Bernice put down the diagnosis of the 10 girls and turned to leave. Zhang Hai didn't know what to say to this woman, but he always felt that she was a little strange. She was a little hostile to him, but at the same time, there was also a strange sense of familiarity. But with Zhang Hai's temperament, he soon forgot about it. Now that the biggest problem of coming here had been solved, the rest of the time was pure fun. Early the next morning, Zhang Hai drove the car and took everyone to the most famous West Reef Island in Miami. West Reef Island was a famous scenic spot in Miami. It was not located on the west side of Miami, but on the south side of Miami. Driving all the way south, they went straight to the vicinity of West Reef Island along Bishkek Avenue. People in South Florida were no stranger to the term Pizza King. It was used in many places. According to legend, the word Bishijing originated from an Indian language. It meant the place where the moon rose. It was very artistic. Bishijing Avenue was another name for a section of U.S. Highway 1 in Miami. Bishijing Garden was a small town in North Miami. Bishijing Bay was a bay between Bishijing and Miami. Key was the name of all the islands in West Reef Island. The small islands south of Miami were all called Key, one after another. There were a lot of names, but the most famous one was Key, Kishijing. You only need to pay $1 to cross the bridge. Of course, you still need to spend money to enter the park. $10 for an ordinary adult and $5 for those with a student ID. For ordinary people who came to play, there was actually no need to go to Bishkek Island. Playing on other small islands was actually very fun. There was a lot of delicious food and perfect scenery. It was a very good place. However, for foreigners, going to Bishkek Island was much more interesting. The most interesting place on Bishkek Island should be the Miami Aquarium. This aquarium was built in 1955. The main characters were 5-ton killer whales, also known as killer whales and dolphins. This might be the earliest commercial sea beast taming performance venue. In the 60s, there was once a well-known TV series in the United States. All the outdoor scenes were filmed here. That TV series made a dolphin named Fipper famous. Although the dolphin had been gone for so many years, there was still a dolphin named Fipper in the park to increase its appeal. This made the old people who watched the TV series very much like to bring their children and grandchildren here to watch the dolphins' performance. They would tell the interesting stories of their youth. Of course, in addition to the killer whales and dolphins, there are also shark aquariums, manatees, tropical aquariums, and sea lion shows in this 35-acre park. Zhang Hai's goal this time is this aquarium. The sea views on both sides of the road look good, but the sea view is also the most famous and the easiest to get tired of looking at. What's more, Delina and others who didn't lack the sea view, soon, everyone was a little tired of looking at it, but fortunately, they arrived at the place they wanted to go at this time. Driving into Bishkek Island, Zhang Hai and others drove directly to the front of the ocean park. After buying the tickets, everyone rushed into the park, But as soon as they entered, an American girl stopped in front of Zhang Hai and others. This American girl looked like she was 21 or 22 years old. She was wearing a t-shirt worn by the park staff and her face was filled with a smile. "Hello, you are tourists, right? I don't know if you need a guide?" Looking at Zhang Hai, the girl asked. "Guide? Do we need to explain when we are going to Ocean Park? We are not going to visit a historical site." Looking at the girl, Zhang Hai asked with some doubts. Is she trying to cheat him of his money? This is not a historical site, but in Xueqi Island, there is more than just strolling around the ocean park. There are actually many fun places on this island, such as some places where you can dive, some places where you can play with paragliding. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl introduced herself. Indeed, it is impossible for a tourist attraction to have only one place. Like other tourist attractions by the sea, the most famous one on Bishkek Island is this ocean park. However, in addition to the ocean park, there were many other places to play. For example, diving places, surfing places, beaches, and so on. There were also places to play sea bikes, paragliding, and so on. There were all kinds of places here. After listening to the girl's introduction, Zhang Hai couldn't help but look at the girls around him. They are the reason why Zhang Hai came here. Do you want to play with these things? Can I? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Aphrodite also asked curiously. Although there is also a sea at home, and even Zhang Hai's sea is more beautiful than here, but Zhang Hai's seaside is really not used for playing, it is used for fishing and playing in the water. Speaking of which, these marine facilities are not available in Zhang Hai's home. Well, if you want to play, then try it. Then we will hire you, Mississippi. Seeing that Aphrodite and the others were interested in playing, Zhang Hai did not let them down and turned to the girl in front of him and said, "Oh, you may have misunderstood. The salary of the guide itself is included in your ticket. The reason why we are like this here is because many locals can't speak English. They are afraid that you will have some difficulties in communication, so it is necessary for us to exist. We just collect some tips." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl shook her head. Their salary is naturally paid by the Miami government. Zhang Hai just pays some tips. Of course, Zhang Hai doesn't know whether there is a kickback relationship between them and those people. Zhang Hai only knows at this time that this design is really quite humane. In fact, to be honest, there are more people who speak Portuguese and Spanish here than English, especially many Latin Americans. They may have immigrated here for many years, but they can't speak or listen to English. It is indeed a bit troublesome to communicate. After seeing that Zhang Hai decided to hire her, the girl also took Zhang Hai and the others to play. First, they had a good time in the ocean park. She explained the major venues and so on very clearly. He has to admit that this girl's knowledge, at least in the aspect of the ocean, is very wide. At the same time, Zhang Hai also has a better understanding of this sea area. When it comes to fishing, whether it is fish that grow or fish that may be raised, the sea in the south is much better than the sea in the north. Just the selection alone is not comparable to Zhang Hai's Boston. After visiting these venues, they went to see the killer whale and dolphin shows. Dolphin shows are everywhere in the world, but to be honest, there is indeed a reason why Miami is so famous. The dolphin show here is not only to sell feelings, but it is really interesting. Zhang Hai wants to raise a dolphin. But considering that his big idiot is not bad, Zhang Hai also withdrew his thoughts. After watching these performances, there was nothing fun to do in Ocean Park. Next was lunch. On Pizza Island, in addition to the ocean park and places to play, there are also many places to eat. Zhang Hai naturally stuffed himself here, and the tour guide also had a good meal with Zhang Hai. It is indeed a good thing for her to meet such a generous employer like Zhang Hai. After lunch, everyone went to the beach. First, they rode the jet ski for a while. In fact, it was also the first time for Zhang Hai to ride this thing, but to be honest, it should not be difficult. After riding the jet ski, everyone went to play paragliding. After this, it was not early anymore. At this time, Zhang Hai and others were ready to go back after playing the last game. If you are not going to come to Pizza Island after tomorrow, then I recommend you to go diving. Hearing that Zhang Hai and others were ready to leave after playing the last game, the tour guide here could not help but recommend it to them. Diving? What's so fun about diving? Hearing the tour guide's words, Zhang Hai was a little disapproving. He was not afraid of the water pressure, and he could breathe underwater. He dived every day to catch lobsters and abalones. What was so fun about this? Maybe you are diving in other places just to see the scenery under the sea, but here, you can see shipwrecks. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little disapproving, the girl smiled. Diving here is so famous, naturally there is a reason. Chapter 289. Sunken Ships. When he heard the girl's words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then a flash of lightning seemed to flash in his mind. He still remembered that a few days ago, when he was in Winthrop, he seemed to have bought some treasure maps of sunken ships. His original idea was to wait until he had time in the future to take a look. Many of them were in the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. How could he forget about it as soon as he arrived here? Now that he heard the girl's words, Jiang Hai instantly remembered. But thinking about it, it was useless. Jiang Hai was very timid. If you asked him to dive so deep to get treasures, he wouldn't dare. What if he ran into a giant pirate in the deep sea, a sperm whale upstream, a group of sharks upstream, a killer whale upstream, a migration of jellyfish and a riot of sea snakes when he swam to the surface? What if he ran into a migration of jellyfish and a riot of sea snakes? In fact, if he encountered all these, it meant that he could die. There was no possibility of survival. But since he was already here, it was impossible for Jiang Hai not to take a look, although he was a little scared. But now, the guide said that they could go to the place where they could dive. The treasures that had been dug out were only the places where they could disembark. Jiang Hai was quite interested in this. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will be invincible. At the very least, he wanted to know what kind of birds these sunken pirate ships were. In the principle of not leaving empty-handed, Jiang Hai signed up all the girls. Seeing that Jiang Hai was so rich, 1 hour of diving $150 per person, the guide was also very happy. Who would believe that she didn't get a commission? But in any case, with Jiang Hai's money, the guide specially found a pair of local diving coaches for Jiang Hai. This was a couple, and they also spoke English. It was easy to talk to them. When they heard that Jiang Hai had a fish farm and often dived, the two were very surprised. However, it was very cost-effective for them to have someone who didn't take care of them. After Jiang Hai and the others put on their diving suits, everyone dived into the water first. Diving was also very particular. They couldn't go down quickly, nor could they come up quickly. This was because the human lungs needed time to adapt. When diving underwater, the lungs were at one frequency. No matter how many meters they went down, they were at another frequency. If a person was at the bottom of the sea, for example, about 100 meters, and rushed up without taking a break, the water pressure would probably crush the person's lungs. Referring to the hairtail, there was also a place called blade fish. Of course, it was not the same species as the blade fish, herring, in the Yangtze River. However, this kind of fish was also very common in the market. The reason why there were no live hairtail fish was that this kind of fish originally lived in the middle section of the ocean. The shallowest part was 30 meters underwater, and the deepest part was more than 100 meters underwater. When the fishing net caught it, because the speed was too fast, the fish's lungs would be crushed in an instant. Therefore, the hairtail fish that were caught were all dead. Although people weren't as fragile as hairtail fish, they weren't much better. Aphrodite and the others didn't know how to swim, let alone dive. At most, they could only flop around a bit. Therefore, they could only snorkel, which was very easy and convenient. Therefore, one of the two instructors was specially assigned to lead them. The main thing was to see if there were any aggressive creatures nearby. The other male instructor, on the other hand, agreed to Jiang Hai's request and wanted to take a look at the sunken ship in the diving area. For this, he even tipped them $100 each. For the sake of the tip, they agreed to let Jiang Hai go to the sunken ship, let alone all of them. Naturally, the instructor wouldn't refuse a financial backer like Jiang Hai. After putting on their equipment, the two of them dived into the water. They deliberately pretended to imitate the instructor's movements. After swimming a few laps on the surface, the two of them slowly dived. This section of the seabed wasn't actually very deep. The deepest part was only about 40 meters, but the seawater here was different from Jiang Hai's. This was a tourist area, so naturally, the seawater wasn't too clear. It was fine looking from above, but at the bottom, the visibility was very ordinary, only about 2 meters. The sea 40 meters below was still very dark. Fortunately, they knew that there were no threatening creatures here, so the instructor and Jiang Hai each took a flashlight and went into the water. Following the guidance of the flashlight, Jiang Hai followed the instructor and slowly swam forward. Not long after, they swam to the front of a sunken ship. However, the sunken ship at this time basically didn't look like a ship anymore. After all, it was a medieval pirate ship. It wasn't like modern ships that were made of metal, so even if it was rotten, one could still roughly see the shape of a ship. However, this ship was made of wood and almost didn't look like a ship anymore. Jiang Hai could only take a rough look. The entire ship was made of wood and was about 20 meters in size. Don't underestimate this 20 meters. A ship of this size could already be as dazzling as an aircraft carrier now. After all, Zhang He's treasure ship, which was known as the strongest ship back then, was only 61 meters long and 13 meters wide. A ship of 2,000 materials was already the limit of Huaxia's shipbuilding industry back then. Before the steam engine, it was impossible to carry a larger ship with wind and manpower. Most pirate ships were more than 10 meters long. A ship of more than 20 meters could be regarded as the flagship of some small pirates or the deputy ship of a big pirate. This was also Jiang Hai's main goal. In fact, this was also the case. Before going into the sea, Jiang Hai also learned about the situation of the pirate ship they were going to visit. This pirate ship was originally called the Windmill. It was a famous pirate in the Caribbean Sea, the Black Baronet Samuel Roberts. It was once his ship before he rose to power. Later, when he changed his flagship, this ship was also his secondary ship. It was destroyed by the Portuguese fleet and sunk here. It had a history of more than 300 years. This ship was divided into 3 floors. The first floor was the deck and the captain's cabin. The second floor was the crew's cabin, the turret, the kitchen, and so on. The third floor was the drainage room and the warehouse. Generally, when the pirates robbed gold and silver, other than dividing it on the spot, they would basically put it in the warehouse and wait until they got back. This was also the place Jiang Hai focused on. He didn't make these ships for culture or anything like that. He just wanted to make money. Some people would say that Jiang Hai had a lot of money now. After selling all the cows, he had more than $1 billion, and it was just a matter of time. But who would complain about money when it was hot? Moreover, Jiang Hai vaguely felt that it would be more comfortable for him to level up on land than in the sea. So no matter what, since Jiang Hai was here, he had to learn more. Together with the coach, Jiang Hai shuttled back and forth in the dilapidated cabin. There was almost nothing left on this ship. Not to mention bones, even boxes, whole planks, cannons, and so on had been moved away. After all, this ship was still too shallow. It was only a few dozen meters deep. They didn't even need to use other ships. A crane on land could bring the ship up. The reason why it was still here was to attract tourists like Jiang Hai. After all, for tourists, sunken ships in the Caribbean Sea were still very attractive. After observing the surroundings of the ship for about an hour, Jiang Hai memorized the front and back of the pirate ship. Then, after receiving the signal from the coach's flashlight, Jiang Hai slowly swam towards the surface of the sea. When they reached sea level, Aphrodite and the others stopped playing. In fact, they were just curious about diving. After all, these girls were still girls. Compared to sunken ships and cannons, they were obviously more interested in bags, clothes, and shoes. After changing his clothes, Jiang Hai gave the guide a tip of $100. Then, they returned to the parking lot. Since Jiang Hai still had some things on his mind, they drove in the direction of the hotel. Along the way, the girls chattered about what they had seen today, including what sea animals they had seen and what delicious food they had eaten. However, Jiang Hai's thoughts had already drifted to the sea. Although Jiang Hai was afraid of death, he was really afraid of death, but suddenly, he felt that he could give it a try. If it didn't work, he would come back immediately. But if it worked, it would be a breakthrough. When he had time, he would sail his ship over. Then, it would be time for him to make a fortune. Humans were like this. They had a certain degree of fluke in everything. Right now, Jiang Hai had such a feeling. Looking at the girls around him, Jiang Hai decided in his heart that maybe he could give it a try at night. But before that, he needed to fully arm himself. An underwater gun, a spear gun, a chop-proof vest, a diving suit. These were things that he didn't use in Winthrop before, so he had to fully arm himself. But fortunately, apart from guns and spear guns, these things were sold in outdoor stores on the roadside. As for these two things that weren't sold, Jiang Hai believed that it shouldn't be a problem for Moses Adams. Sure enough, it was similar to what Jiang Hai thought. When they returned to the hotel, Moses Adams had already returned. He told him what he needed. Moses Adams patted his chest and said that these things were small problems. At the same time, he also brought back a piece of news. The other party was also willing to turn a big problem into a small one, and a small one into nothing. They would treat it as if this matter didn't happen. However, after hearing this, Jiang Hai smiled. He believed that the other party didn't dare to make a big deal out of it. Because if he made a big deal out of it, he would be dead if he returned to China. However, this didn't mean that they would give up on dealing with him. Jiang Hai wasn't stupid. Since when were the rich people in China so easy to talk to? Now that he had given in, it was only on the surface. In private, it wasn't accurate. In the next few days, you should go out less at night. I don't think that guy will give in so easily. Chapter 290. As the old saying goes, a dog can't change its spots. Jiang Hai didn't know whether Qin Fan was a dog or not, but he was. He had already been beaten for 3 days. Although he looked miserable, he only had superficial wounds. Most of the wounds were scratched by Aphrodite and the others. Jiang Hai didn't kick his internal organs too hard. 2 of his ribs were broken. Although it hurt when he moved, it didn't hinder him from getting off the ground as long as he was properly fixed. Compared to China, hiring a female nurse depended on a person's looks. In the United States, flight attendants and nurses were absolutely subversive. If it was an international airline or a private clinic, it would be fine. After all, international airlines were the face of the United States. In private clinics, it was related to the boss's taste. However, most men would still like to see a prettier girl. But public hospitals and domestic flights were out of the question. For domestic flights, the flight attendants in the United States, including the flight attendants from Canada to the United States, were almost 40 years old and had long been immune to drugs. As for the nurses in public hospitals, it was understandable if you suspected that they practiced boxing or had a background in boxing. So the day after the counselor left, Qin Fan's ribs were fixed and he was discharged from the hospital. But this time, he changed to a different hotel and stayed in Miami. In a little more than a day, his family changed 3 bodyguards for him. These 3 bodyguards were not all from within the country. Only 1 bodyguard was from abroad. The other 2 were black and white. The black man was from Africa, and the white man was from the United States. They were all from the world's #1 security company, Blackwater. After the 2 bodyguards arrived, Qin Fan began to implement his plan. Indeed, he couldn't use the law to cause any trouble for Jiang Hai. But it didn't mean that he wouldn't cause trouble for Jiang Hai, especially in Miami, a place where desperados were everywhere. Tonight, he went to a nightclub and met a person the FBI wanted to capture for a long time. While he was thinking about how to deal with Jiang Hai, a plane carrying some of China's elite landed in Los Angeles. Then, the people on the plane turned and flew directly to Miami. It was obvious that Chile had already revealed this guy's address to those who wanted to know about this news. It was none of Chile's business whether he was brought back to be interrogated, or he was directly killed abroad. However, Jiang Hai needed to pay attention to this. Fortunately, the Americans weren't crazy. They weren't so lawless that they dared to kill people in the United States or in a crowded place. As for the Carnival Hotel, unless they really didn't want to live, the world's #1 cruise line was a joke. Therefore Jiang Hai, who had already arranged everything, didn't care much about it. The next day, he took everyone to the swamp park. This Everglades Park is called the Florida Everglades Park. It was established in 1974 as a subtropical species conservation area. There were all kinds of trees and many wild animals here. When they walked in, they could see countless frogs, grasshoppers, and fish in the water. They were not afraid of people and would even come over to eat when they saw people. There were many snails and other mollusks on the leaves and on the grass by the roadside. If they were lucky, they could see sea cows, jaguars, otters, and other creatures. But Jiang Hai and the others weren't so lucky. Moreover, Jiang Hai was interested in these creatures, but it didn't mean that Aphrodite and the others were interested in them. Most of the women were only interested in cute things, such as kittens, puppies, or feline cubs. But for ferocious beasts, their perception was very ordinary. Therefore, Zhang Hai and the others just casually walked around here and then went back. On this day, Moses, Adams helped Zhang Hai buy all the things he needed, including an underwater engine. This could allow him to move quickly underwater, but there was a problem. Sometimes the speed was too fast, and the water pressure may be unbearable. Moses, Adams also explained this to Zhang Hai. But Zhang Hai didn't care. He didn't care how big the water pressure was. The only thing he cared about was how fast he could run. After everything was ready, that night, Zhang Hai quietly left the hotel and drove to a nearby uninhabited beach that he had already observed. This place also avoided surveillance. Then Zhang Hai put on all the equipment and dived underwater. From this, it could be seen that Zhang Hai really cherished his life. He was really well dressed. Although he can breathe freely underwater, Zhang Hai still brought a small tank of oxygen. He also wore a thick diving suit with velvet on the inside. On the outside of the diving suit, there was also a full-body metal anti-stab suit. This was to prevent encountering sharks and the like. There were 2 spears on his back, the kind that could shoot triangular iron arrows. Generally, the island countries used this kind of spear to hunt whales. Zhang Hai also carried 2 spears on his back, plus an underwater mobile phone that could shoot 8 bullets underwater. It was said to be made in Russia. Zhang Hai didn't know whether it was made in Russia or not, but it was quite heavy in his hands, according to Moses, Adams. These 3 things, in fact, were not troublesome to get locally. After all, this was a very chaotic city. But there was one thing: these 3 things could not be brought back, so Zhang Hai could only enjoy himself here. He had to throw them away before leaving. Zhang Hai didn't care. In fact, he just took these things for self-defense. In addition, he also took a dagger, the external underwater engine, a bag like the stab-proof suit, a very bright headlamp, and a GPS positioning device that could be used underwater. Before this, he had asked AI Dehua to show him the location of the drawings through the internet and mark the closest point to here. Such equipment, not to say that he was armed to the teeth, but it was almost there. Underwater, Zhang Hai started the engine and rushed to the place he booked in the distance. Even if there was an engine underwater, the speed was definitely not comparable to that of a ship. But fortunately, this time Zhang Hai's target location was not very far, probably only about 100 nautical miles from Miami. The ship just sank in a trench, according to the information written on it. The owner of the ship here was the ship of Henry Morgan, an early pirate known as the Demon of the Sea. Henry Morgan himself died in 1688. He was one of the earliest pirates. He was also the most notorious guy, but he had a great reputation among pirates because this guy's life could also be said to be a legendary life. In the earliest days, he was actually a marine. In the era of Spanish domination of the Atlantic, Britain was actually a bird living under Spain. However, the British were not willing to go on like this, so at that time, there were many appointed pirates. They were pirates, but in fact, they were specially arranged by various countries, that is, the so-called plundering license holders. According to the current words, they are shichibukai, but this shichibukai is not recognized by other countries. Henry Morgan was the most powerful shichibukai at that time. His crew were all thieves, liars, runaway slaves, murderers, without a skill. Don't even think about getting on his ship. It was precisely because he gathered these people that his power expanded very quickly. When Columbus first arrived near Jamaica in the Caribbean Sea, he once described it as the most beautiful island in the eye. The mountains are continuous, and the land seems to touch the sky. But in fact, when the British first landed in this place, it was not so beautiful. The place where they landed was a small piece of barren land. In order to guard against the Spanish, the British built Port Royal here. In just a few years, it became the capital of Sin, the city of red names. It was the most notorious secular paradise with the worst discipline. Known as the most evil place on earth, under the rule of the British, it was the capital of Jamaica and also the sky of pirates. Among the pirates, Henry Morgan was definitely the most powerful one. He attacked the Spanish merchant ships and residences, and then returned to Port Royal to squander. According to the records at that time, Port Royal's rum was flowing all over the place, and people were drunk to death everywhere. The only task of the female professional workers was to help the sailors say goodbye to the money in their pockets. Most of this money was robbed by Henry Morgan, and it was precisely because of this that his reputation was so high that it made people's hair stand on end. He led 650 sailors to attack 2 cities along the coast of Venezuela and looted a large amount of treasures in the Battle of the Gods. He found that the Spanish had blocked this area, with cannons on the coast and 3 huge warships lying in the open sea channel. Just when the people on their side thought that they were dead, Henry Morgan blew up 2 warships with a boat loaded with explosives, and then played a trick to make the Spanish think that they were going to attack the inland, but they slipped away quietly under the cover of the night. In this battle, he was regarded as a god and was named the Pirate King. Later, he gathered 36 ships and more than 2,000 pirates and attacked Panama. After a big battle, the pirates won a Pyrrhic victory, but at that time, the British had signed an armistice with the Spanish. He was then summoned back to the country and put in prison for breaking the unity. But he was a smart man, so in the end, King Charles II pardoned him and appointed him as the Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. He worked for 15 years until his death in 1688. Chapter 291. Zhang Hai didn't care about what happened to Henry Morgan. He was too lazy to care. Anyway, Henry Morgan had been dead for almost 400 years. However, Zhang Hai was still very interested in his treasure. His target this time was the sunken ship called Sin City. Of course, this name was written on the sea map. Zhang Hai wasn't sure if it was real or not. In fact, many people knew about this ship. Even the British government knew about it because it was very famous when it sank. At that time, the United States was not as powerful as it was now. At the beginning, this place was also a colony of European countries. After 1773, the United Kingdom alone gained the upper hand. Before that, this place was a colony of Britain, France, Holland, Germany, and other countries. When the United Kingdom and Spain were in deep trouble, Henry Morgan naturally focused his attention not only on South America, but also on North America, especially Florida. After all, this place was the estuary of the Caribbean Sea. Usually, when gathering grass to beat rabbits, they would always attack once or twice. This ship was blocked by the Spanish fleet here after robbing the Spanish colony in North America. After a big battle, although Henry Morgan escaped, he also left behind a few battleships. Some of the more submerged ships had long been divided by the United Kingdom and Spain. Later, some of the more submerged ships were gradually salvaged after entering the later era of science and technology. However, only the ship with the most jewelry had not been salvaged because this ship was really unlucky. In this sea area, there was almost an oceanic trench. But coincidentally, there was only one trench. The deepest one was more than 3,700 meters, and this ship happened to be stuck at a depth of about 1,760 meters. At this depth, it was impossible for people to go down. If they sent a submarine or something like that, they were afraid that the ship would fall more than 3,000 meters. Then, it would be even more impossible to salvage it. So, although they knew that the ship was here, there was nothing they could do. If they lost it, they were reluctant. If they could salvage it, they couldn't do it. They couldn't even get the things inside. So in the end, whether it was the United States or the United Kingdom, they decided to leave it here. Anyway, it wouldn't be lost. Later on, when the fisherman was selling these treasure maps, some people also found this place. However, after taking a look, they were prepared to go back and beat that guy up. It was impossible to fish up such a boat. However, it didn't mean that Zhang Hai couldn't do it. At least, Zhang Hai was working hard for this. The speed of the engine wasn't slow, and Zhang Hai was also the fastest, about 20 nautical miles per hour. Zhang Hai ran for nearly 6 hours in the water, and when he reached the trench, it was already midnight. Looking at his Rolex watch, Zhang Hai turned on the headlight, but as soon as he turned it on, he was shocked. He turned on his headlight and saw a huge fish swimming quickly in front of him. Subconsciously, he wanted to grab the spear gun, but when he looked closely, he realized that the fish was not a shark, but a bluefin tuna, which was more valuable than any other shark. Looking at the blue lines on its back and its streamlined body, Zhang Zian was shocked. Zhang Hai breathed a sigh of relief. As long as it wasn't a shark, this fish couldn't attack him. After the fish swam away quickly, Zhang Hai also looked around. The Atlantic bluefin tuna was actually a fish that lived in groups. With a sweep of the headlight, Zhang Hai also found that in the vicinity, in addition to the Atlantic bluefin tuna he saw just now, there were many other tunas, but the species were a bit mixed. Most of them were Atlantic bluefin, but some of them were yellowfin. After raising fish for so many years, Zhang Hai's ability to judge fish was still there. According to Zhang Hai's preliminary estimate, if it wasn't for the hype of the king fish, this batch of tuna was worth about $2 million. This made Zhang Hai smack his lips. This was more profitable than raising cattle. Salmon, American redfish, compared with this fish, it was really not a grade worse. Unfortunately, there was no way to cultivate these fish, because this fish had to swim around all year round. The area of his own fishery was still too small, and there was no way to sell this kind of fish seedlings. There were no live ones, let alone artificial breeding. This was just for show. If Zhang Hai came here by boat, he could get a few on board, provided that they were not discovered by others. One must know that there was a time limit to the fishing of tuna. Every year from August to October, it was the time to fish for tuna. After this time, it was not allowed to fish. So Zhang Hai could only sigh regretfully and plunge into the deep sea. As the numbers on Zhang Hai's GPS kept jumping, Zhang Hai was getting farther and farther away from sea level. Along the way, Zhang Hai saw a lot of creatures. Most of them were fish. Of course, there were some other things occasionally. For example, jellyfish and the like. And even Zhang Hai saw a few sharks in the distance. But unfortunately, they were all small sharks, either cat sharks or mackerel sharks. These sharks were not big in size. When they saw the light source, they would come over to take a look, but they would leave immediately after taking a look. Obviously, the sharks here had seen humans and suffered losses in the hands of humans. They were unwilling to meet Zhang Hai face to face. As the water got deeper and deeper, Zhang Hai also felt that the water temperature was getting colder and colder. Even if he was wearing fluffy clothes inside, Zhang Hai felt a little cold and couldn't help but shrink his neck. The temperature of the sea changed all year round. The temperature of the sea level was related to the local temperature, but 350 meters below the sea level, basically the whole world, except for the North Pole and the South Pole, the temperature was about the same. This layer was also called the thermosphere, and below the thermosphere, the deeper 1 kilometer, the colder it would be. Take the Atlantic Ocean for example. The average temperature of the Atlantic Ocean was 16 degrees. 9 degrees. 1 kilometer below the surface of the water temperature was about 4 to 5 degrees. 1 kilometer below, it was 2 to 3 degrees. About 3 kilometers below, it was more than 1 degree. Although Zhang Hai is now extremely resistant, it is not to the extent that he can't avoid cold and heat, but as long as the temperature is not negative 20 or 30 degrees, Zhang Hai still has no problem. As the bottom of the sea got deeper and deeper, after 1 kilometer, the fish around Zhang Hai completely disappeared. Originally, before 1 kilometer, he occasionally saw a very ugly fish, lanternfish, whose scientific name is deep-sea anglerfish. It looks similar to an anglerfish, but there is a small light on its head, which attracts other small fish to look at it curiously. Then it eats the fish. This kind of fish basically lives between 700 and 900 meters. After 1 kilometer, this kind of fish disappeared. It seemed that in an instant, there was only Zhang Hai in the whole world. Except for the place where the headlight shone, the other places were dark. To be honest, such a scene is really scary. After all, there is nothing around him. In Zhang Hai's mind, he unconsciously imagined that he was swimming in front of some sea monsters, preparing to prey on him. Fortunately, he knows that this is just his imagination. While giving himself courage, he maintained his focus and continued to swim downstream. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, Zhang Hai's headlight, which can illuminate 200 meters, finally found his target, Sin City. This is a very old medieval galleon. The whole length of the ship is about 30 meters, and the width is about half of the length, about 15 meters. Although the sinking time is longer than the time Zhang Hai saw the sunken ship last time, perhaps because it has been in the deep sea, there is no oxygen and no sunlight, so the natural corrosion is much lower. How can Zhang Hai live without oxygen? Well, Zhang Hai also doesn't know how he lives here. Anyway, he doesn't feel suffocated. At this time, the ship was in an I shape. The bow and stern of the ship happened to be stuck on both sides of the sea. It was just hanging there. The sails and other things on the ship had long rotted away. Some of the ship's planks and other things were also broken. Some passing kelp has taken root and sprouted in the empty cabin. It floats around with the current under the water, as if it is saying, "Come on, come on." But who knows what the result will be after going there? On the bow of the ship, the Virgin Mary, which was originally made of metal, can no longer be seen at this time. Only a lot of shellfish can be seen parasitizing there. There are also some plants that Zhang Hai can't name. Looking at the appearance of the ship, Zhang Hai feels that the cold wind in his head seems to be getting stronger and stronger. The whole ship gives people the feeling of a ghost ship. Well, this is a ghost ship to begin with. Zhang Hai deliberately looked at the ship when he was descending. The ship is just hanging on the edge of the cliff. Although he is not sure if the ship can withstand the impact of his fall, Zhang Hai is not prepared to try. If it can't withstand the impact and falls, won't he have to live more than 2,000 meters downstream? That would be too tiring. So he is prepared to lie down on the cliffs on both sides first, then slowly walk to the ship. But the moment Zhang Hai shines the headlight on the cliffs on both sides, his scalp feels like it is exploding. The hair on his whole body tightens in an instant, and his hair stands on end. His whole back gives a dense feeling of disgust. He almost can't hold the engine in his hand. Fortunately, he is a brave person. He forcibly grabbed the engine and turned it off, preventing it from falling. Zhang Hai swallowed another mouthful of saliva. He resisted the disgust and looked at the cliffs on both sides. Under the illumination of his headlight, the cliffs on both sides are densely packed with countless insects. Looking at these insects, Zhang Hai subconsciously stopped in the middle. He doesn't know what to do. Chapter 292. Phew, calm down, calm down. Zhang Hai placed the engine behind him and took 2 deep breaths. Well, he didn't know what he was inhaling, but he was just comforting himself to calm down. Then he looked at the worms again. The smallest of these worms was as big as an adult's head. They had a fleshy brown body and were just lying there, moving their tentacles from time to time. They had a hard shell on their back and looked like a cockroach, but they didn't have wings. The one that looked the most similar to a cockroach was the tide worm. Its Chinese name was rat woman. Usually, people who lived in a one-story house or if the house was damp, would be prone to this worm. It wasn't big, only 3 to 5 centimeters long. It didn't bite and wasn't poisonous, so it wasn't harmful to humans. It mainly ate leaves and vegetables, and was a threat to nature. But in fact, tide worms originally lived in the sea. They were the only crustaceans that adapted to living on land. They were considered close relatives to crabs, shrimps, lobsters, and so on. They didn't want to eat shrimps at all. The creature in front of Zhang Hai was called the giant deep-sea louse. In fact, it was the tide worm of the sea. Although this creature wasn't as herbivorous as the tide worm, it wasn't a threat to humans. Although this creature was carnivorous, it wasn't a ferocious creature. They only cleaned the carcasses of animals at the bottom of the sea. Their combat power was really weak. Zhang Hai entered the deep sea and was already heavily armed, not to mention these deep-sea creatures. Therefore, he more or less understood the situation. After seeing the creature clearly, Zhang Hai gradually calmed down. He glanced at the ship below and swam towards the cliff. Perhaps they felt the change in the water flow. When Zhang Hai swam over, the deep-sea louse quickly crawled away. Obviously, compared to Zhang Hai who was afraid of them, they were more afraid of Zhang Hai. This allowed Zhang Hai to gently lie down on the cliff. After slowly climbing down, Zhang Hai arrived at the bow of the ship. Zhang Hai's feet left the cliff, and with a light step, he was already standing on the Maria statue on the bow of the ship. Bang! When Zhang Hai's foot landed, although he only added a little weight, the ship still shook. This gave Zhang Hai a fright. Fortunately, the ship only shook a little before it stopped shaking. This made Zhang Hai feel relieved. But just as he took a step forward, a shadow flashed in front of him. This gave him another scare, but when the headlight shone over, he couldn't help but feel a little stuffy. This was a devouring eel. There were many photos of this thing on the internet. It had a big head and a body as thin as a rope. The longest they could grow was 1.8 meters. They lived in the deep sea, but they still posed no threat to him. Sigh, how dare I? Zhang Hai was speechless as he watched the devouring eel swim away. Ever since he entered the bottom of the sea, he had been startled. It was too tiring. When did he become so timid? In fact, it wasn't Zhang Hai's fault. People would always have some fear of the unknown, just like him now. There is nothing to be afraid of. There is nothing to be afraid of. After giving himself a boost of courage, Zhang Hai took out the spear gun behind him. Next time, if anyone scares him, he will shoot them without hesitation. Since Zhang Hai wanted to come to the deep sea, he naturally checked the information. In fact, in the deep sea, except for some poisonous creatures, at least among the animals found by humans, there were almost no animals that were a threat to humans. In the deep sea, there were 4 kinds of creatures with the most aggressive. The giant squid was divided into 2 kinds, the king squid and the giant spear squid. The king squid was up to 20 meters long, and the giant spear squid was bigger than the king squid, which was a threat to humans. Second, the sperm whale, after all, was a carnivorous whale. It was definitely a threat. Third, the 6-jaw shark, which was an extremely ancient shark. It had not evolved since it evolved 200 million years ago. It was one of the overlords in the deep sea. Fourthly, the emperor ribbonfish, which was the thing that was always regarded as the dragon king, could grow up to 15 meters long. However, there was a problem. This kind of fish had no teeth and moved very slowly. It was not much faster than a human walking in the water. This hunting game was like an eel, hiding in a place and then waiting for a fish to come over. Then, it would suck the fish in and be done with it. Except for these 4 creatures, there were no deep-sea creatures that were a threat to Zhang Hai. Sometimes, Zhang Hai thought too much. After taking a few deep breaths, Zhang Hai walked forward. Of course, knowing was knowing, but humans still knew little about the deep sea after all. If there were any messy creatures, it would be troublesome. If a plesiosaur or basilosaurus came out, wouldn't Zhang Hai be finished here? So it would never be wrong to be careful. Walking forward little by little, Zhang Hai found that there were still many creatures in the vicinity. For example, there was a fish swimming by him at this time. This fish was about 15 or 16 centimeters long and looked very ugly. The taowu was ugly, but in fact, compared to it, the taowu was actually a very beautiful fish. It could be raised as an ornamental fish. This kind of fish was not big, but it was earth-shattering. Perhaps in the deep sea, no one could see each other when they reached adulthood. This kind of fish had almost the same face as the taowu, but its big teeth were crooked and protruding out like this. So it was even more ugly. This fish was called fong, and it was a very common fish in the deep sea. From 500 meters to 5,000 meters below sea level, it was their paradise. In fact, according to human standards, 200 meters below sea level was the deep sea. In addition to this deep sea overlord, Zhang Hai also saw a very beautiful creature. Zhang Hai had only seen this creature dead. This creature was called string eel. Unlike the ugly devouring eel, this string eel was very beautiful. Its entire body was like a string. It had a long mouth and big eyes. Most importantly, this kind of string eel could emit light. Moreover, its skin was transparent, and one could see its internal organs. Therefore, when it flashed, it was quite beautiful. But unfortunately, these creatures could not be taken to the surface. The water pressure was different, so they would die if they went up. In addition, there were a lot of shellfish and insects here. Zhang Hai had always been disinterested in insects. Therefore, he only took a glance and quickly walked towards the depths of the ship, following what he had learned. Such a ship, the first floor and plate armor had almost no treasures. The first floor was the captain's room. If it was not the captain's main ship, then it was the first mate who was the captain. The second floor was where the sailors lived. There was also a cannon room, a warehouse for vegetables and wine, and a kitchen. Some pirates would put their treasures on the second floor because the space in the warehouse was not enough, but this ship was so big that it was almost impossible. The only treasures that could be found on the second floor were those that the pirates directly divided after robbing and kept. But the probability of this was not very high, so Zhang Hai's goal was the third floor. Of course, when he passed by the second floor, it was also good to take a look. Zhang Hai walked slowly forward on the plate armor. After reaching the captain's room, he also took a look inside. The door of the captain's room had long been lost. As a result, there was nothing inside. Other than scaring away 2 vampire squid, there was nothing else. As for the vampire squid, it was just a name. This kind of small squid, the largest was only 15 centimeters. Unless it was caught and looked at closely, it was a little scary. Other than that, there was no other effect. Zhang Hai was afraid, but he would not be afraid of these things. After confirming that there was nothing in the captain's room, Zhang Hai followed the passage of the first floor of the plate armor and slowly climbed to the second floor. After entering the second floor, under the sweep of the headlamp, there was nothing else except for some fangs and line eels. Zhang Hai walked down carefully. Compared to the first floor, The door on the second floor was much better maintained. Perhaps it was because it opened inwards. It was still well preserved, but unfortunately, Zhang Hai was not a person who liked to preserve cultural relics. Anyway, he could not get on this ship, so he did not hold back. Holding the spear in both hands, Zhang Hai went up and kicked a wooden door directly out. The situation in the cabin was reflected in Zhang Hai's sight. This should be a sailor's room. There were 2 bunk beds in it, and there were some sawdust and some clothes that were blown up by Zhang Hai's kick. Other than that, there was nothing else. Zhang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips after glancing at it. Sure enough, it was as he thought. There were probably not many treasures in these sailors' rooms. But just as he was about to leave, he suddenly saw a reflection in the corner of the upper bunk of a bed. This made Zhang Hai a little surprised, so he slowly swam in and came to the second floor. After 400 years, the wood of the bed would certainly not be able to withstand Zhang Hai's footsteps. Now that it had a shape, it was already quite difficult. Therefore, Zhang Hai could only float and look at the direction of his gaze. He saw that there was something hanging on the wooden stake at the head of the bed. Zhang Hai casually took it and couldn't help but be surprised. Because this thing was actually not corroded, and it was very hard. It looked like it should be metal. After Zhang Hai wiped away the seaweed outside this thing, Zhang Hai found that it was a piece of dark brown metal. When he opened it, it turned out to be a pocket watch. This made Zhang Hai a little surprised. This could be considered an unexpected gain. Of course, the needle in the pocket watch had long stopped working. There was not even a glass cover on it, so it didn't look very valuable. Chapter 293. Zhang Hai wasn't very sure what material this pocket watch was made of. But he was very clear that it shouldn't be ordinary iron. If it was iron, it might have already rusted. But he didn't know what it was, so he decided to take it back and study it. Zhang Hai put it in his pocket and continued to swim away. The second room was the same. He broke the door violently, but it was a pity that there was nothing this time. The third room, the fourth room, the fifth room. A sailboat like this, if one wanted to operate it and rob it, one would need close to 100 people. It was naturally impossible for 100 people to all live in a room with 4 people. Pirates were naturally divided into different ranks, and the highest was naturally the captain. Next in line was the chief officer, followed by the leaders of the various groups. Some were in charge of logistics, some were in charge of keeping watch, some were in charge of keeping track, some were in charge of inventory, some were in charge of kidnapping, and so on. Apart from these middle-level leaders, those who enjoyed the highest treatment were naturally the combatants. After all, they lived a life of bloodshed, so they lived and ate the best food. In addition to the combatants, the others were ordinary sailors and handymen. The combatants and leaders lived in a room with 4 people, but the sailors and handymen were much worse. Zhang Hai went through the rooms one by one. There were only 10 rooms with 4 bedrooms for 40 people. As for the other rooms, there were 6 rooms for 8 people. There were also 2 large bunk rooms. These were the places where all the people lived. Zhang Hai looked at Zhang Hai. In the rear bunk rooms and where the sailors lived, there wasn't much, and they didn't have much to gain. So Zhang Hai only found some things in the first 10 rooms. In addition to the pocket watch, there were 2 necklaces, and he didn't know what material they were made of. After looking through all the sailors' rooms, there were some turrets and warehouses, but there was nothing in them. The cannonballs had long disappeared, and the turrets had become broken toys. The kitchen and other things could still vaguely be seen, but they had long lost their original appearance. After looking through all the things, Zhang Hai also strolled through the second floor. Sure enough, it was as he thought. The treasure was really on the 3rd floor. Then Zhang Hai went straight to the 3rd floor, but when he came in, Zhang Hai found that the first 3 warehouses on the 3rd floor were damaged. There was nothing inside, and he could clearly see outside. It seemed that this was the reason why the ship sank. He only hoped that those people 400 years ago didn't get the treasure. If the treasure was gone, then Zhang Hai's trip would be in vain. With such thoughts in his mind, Zhang Hai continued to swim forward, and soon arrived at the 4th warehouse. When the 4th warehouse was opened, suddenly a few tentacles, and with lightning speed, they wrapped around Zhang Hai. Looking at the long barbed tentacles, fortunately, Zhang Hai had been on guard. Seeing these tentacles wrapped around him, Zhang Hai didn't say anything and directly pulled the trigger. With a huge impact, the spear instantly shot into the door. It penetrated the body of the creature in the door and flew straight to the other side of the warehouse with this creature. Only hearing a loud bang, Zhang Hai felt that the ship couldn't help but shake a few times. When the shaking stopped, Zhang Hai also looked inside with the headlamp. Sure enough, the thing he had been guarding against appeared. Is this a king squid or a giant spear squid? No matter what it is, this time you are unlucky. Looking at the giant squid, which was almost 6 meters long, pinned to the wall, it was still waving its tentacles, trying to struggle. But it was thinking too much. Zhang Hai's spear was really made when he caught whales in the past. The strength of a whale couldn't break free, let alone a squid, so no matter how it struggled, it was useless. Seeing this guy, Zhang Hai didn't dare to use the spear now. After all, the ship was not very sturdy, so he took out the dagger beside him, swam to the front of this giant squid, grabbed one of its tentacles, and waved the dagger to cut it. Zhang Hai's dagger was not ordinary. Under the influence of Zhang Hai's power, the tentacle was instantly separated from the squid. Zhang Hai threw the tentacle that was still moving far away and cut the second one. He would not allow any threat to be around him. A few minutes later, all the tentacles of this squid had been cut off by Zhang Hai. The blue blood also filled this space, but Zhang Hai didn't care. No longer caring about the still squirming octopus, Zhang Hai looked at the room. With this look, Zhang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up in an instant. He only saw that at this time, the cabin was full of things. Huge chests, one after another, were thrown in the distance. However, many of the chests were broken. Inside the chests, there were things about the same size as the gold coins that Zhang Hai got before. They were scattered all over the room. Although there were moss and other things growing on them, Zhang Hai was very sure that these things should be gold or silver coins. Among these coins, there were also some pearls or gems. Although the ropes and the like had disappeared, Zhang Hai was very sure that these things were just for fun. They couldn't be made of glass, right? This was something that had been ridiculed miserably. This time I'm rich, I'm rich. Waving his fist vigorously, Zhang Hai said excitedly. According to his vision, if these things were brought ashore, there would be more than 10 tons. Not to mention more than 10 tons of real gold, silver, pearls, and gems. The most important thing was that these things were more than 300 years ago, nearly 400 years ago. Thinking with his thumb, Zhang Hai knew that he was rich. Although there were some troubles in front of these things, Zhang Hai felt that these troubles were nothing. Raising cattle was indeed profitable, but after paying taxes, it would be good if he could keep more than 1 billion yuan. Now that he had quietly produced so many antiques, he couldn't help but chuckle. Although the antiques of the European Middle Ages were not as good as those of the Ming Dynasty, these were still antiques. A gold coin, if sold according to the price of gold, was definitely worthless, but if it was a gold coin from 300 years ago, then it would be at least 10 times more valuable. At this time, Zhang Hai had so many in front of him, he really felt that luck was waving at him. There is still one more warehouse, I want to take a look. Then he grabbed a lot of gold coins and threw them into the bag he brought. He needed to identify these things first, and then think about how to get the things in the ship into his hands. But before going up, he had to take a look at the last warehouse, so he could rest assured. Ignoring the giant squid that was still twisting there, Zhang Hai walked into the last warehouse. This time, he didn't touch anything, and this room was a lot emptier. The whole room was not smaller than the previous one, but at this time, there were only 2 boxes. Zhang Hai swam over curiously. After confirming that there was nothing else here, Zhang Hai first smashed one of the boxes, which contained a set of armor. This set of armor was already black, but there was still a faint trace of gold, which made Zhang Hai couldn't help but think of the gold coins he picked up in the beginning. The color was not much different from this, but this one seemed to be redder, which meant that the gold content was not enough. The style of this armor was also very strange. It was the upper body, or to be exact, the whole body, because the lower body was a skirt. However, this skirt was not like the skirt of ancient Chinese battle armor. Instead, it was more like a ballet skirt. The waist of the upper body was also very thin, and the neck collar was also very high. This was the only thing in the entire box. Zhang Hai couldn't help but be confused. Is this really armor? Although he was a little curious, Zhang Hai still put this armor aside for the time being, and then smashed the other box. But as soon as this box was opened, Zhang Hai had some regrets, because he should have opened this box gently. If one of the things inside was broken, then he would really be distressed because at this time, there was a pair of vases in front of him. The base color of these two vases was white, and there were blue patterns on them. Jiang Hai could clearly see that there was a dragon pattern and a phoenix pattern on the vase. Looking at these two things, Jiang Hai's heartbeat couldn't help but slow down by half a beat. He was very sure that these things should be real. After all, no one had come to this ship for more than 300 years. Naturally, it was impossible for someone to deliberately dive underwater and put a pair of vases on the ship in these years. In addition, the style of this vase was more than 300 years old. As long as one carefully thought about it, anyone who knew a little about history would take a deep breath, because this style, this time, this dynasty, only represented one thing. Ming Qing Hua. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai felt that his heart was about to jump out. His head couldn't help but be a little dazed, and he also felt a little weak. There was also a feeling of palpitations. He knew that this meant that his blood pressure was high. But now, not to mention high blood pressure, even if blood rushed to his brain, it couldn't stop his surging emotions. Ming Qing Hua, Ming Qing Hua. These three words were like the Monkey King's band-tightening spell. They kept repeating in Jiang Hai's mind, making him tremble unconsciously. My God, my God, my God, compared with these two things, the things in that room are nothing. Jiang Hai scolded secretly, waving his fist vigorously. This adventure was so worth it. With trembling hands, Jiang Hai slowly picked up one of the vases, turned it upside down, and looked at it. There were 6 big words written on it: Ming Dynasty Wanli Year. Chapter 294. Hey boss, you're finally back. If you didn't come back, they would have killed me. But to be honest, your medical skills are really amazing. The legendary ancient Chinese medicine can actually cure congenital deafness and muteness. This time, I've really learned something. Watching Jiang Hai walk into his suite with a huge bag on his back, Moses, Adams, who was also in the suite at this time, immediately greeted him excitedly. Behind him were Aphrodite and the others with a bitter face. Last night, when Jiang Hai left, he actually told Moses, Adams, but he didn't care. He thought that Jiang Hai just went out to have fun. After all, he was a man. Moreover, when they were in New York, the two of them also had a lot of fun. These days, Jiang Hai looked at his daughters all day long. He really didn't have time and leisure to play. Indeed, in Moses Adams' view, although Jiang Hai only had 2 daughters, Delina and Marion, but for so many days, under the intentional guidance of Aphrodite and the others, Jiang Hai didn't touch them. In Moses Adams' view, Jiang Hai probably regarded these girls as his daughters. Otherwise, there was no reason for him not to touch them. Aphrodite and the others were very good-looking. At least in his view, they met both the Western and Eastern aesthetic standards. Their figures were also very good. In such a case, there was only one possibility that the women took the initiative and Jiang Hai was still indifferent. What? Mental misophobia? Don't mess around. Jiang Hai even touched those socialites. What else couldn't he do? As for the problem that rabbits don't eat the grass near their burrows, he had long ignored it. It was also possible that the Europeans and Americans didn't have such an idea. Rabbits eat grass, so naturally, they would eat any grass. Why are you only back now? Didn't you say that it would be safer for us to stay in the hotel? Why did you go out by yourself for so long? You even didn't come back for the night. Seeing Jiang Hai's apologetic look, Aphrodite was pushed forward by the others. Although she didn't want to criticize Jiang Hai, she was the elder sister among them. Daliana and Marion didn't feel right to criticize Jiang Hai. After all, she was the daughter. Therefore, if she had any opinions, she would always raise them to Jiang Hai. As she spoke, her resentful little eyes kept drifting towards Jiang Hai. Her meaning was very obvious. There are so many free things at home, but you don't want them and insist on going out to have fun. Are all men so unreliable? Ah, hee, it's not what you think. I went out to do something. All right, you guys go back to your room first. I still have some things to discuss with Moses. Although it was a little awkward, Jiang Hai really didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't afraid of ghosts calling at his door, so after saying it calmly, he looked at Moses, Adams behind the girls. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girls looked at each other, and then left Jiang Hai's room under Aphrodite's lead. Only Moses, Adam stayed in Zhang Hai's room. He looked at Zhang Hai's serious eyes and knew that there must be something going on. I got some more things, some real things. You see what you can do. Zhang Hai repeatedly confirmed that there was no one else here and there were no hotel surveillance cameras. Zhang Hai took down the big bag behind him and said with a serious face. This bag was bought outside after Zhang Hai came back. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to carry these things back. What is it? Looking at Zhang Hai's mysterious look, Moses, Adams asked with some confusion. Under his puzzled gaze, Zhang Hai opened the big bag behind him and carefully took out two things wrapped in newspaper from inside, and carefully put them on the coffee table. Looking at Zhang Hai's careful look, Moses, Adams, who originally wanted to help, couldn't help but sit back down. Looking at these two things, they should be vases. Thinking about the price of the antique vases in Huaxia, he felt that it was better for him to sit down obediently, because if they were really antiques, he wouldn't be able to afford it even if he lost his life. This is a good thing I just got. I'm sure it's from the Ming Dynasty, but how do I sell this thing? Slowly taking away the newspaper, two vases appeared in front of Zhang Hai. Although Zhang Hai wanted to take these two vases back and collect them himself, there was a problem. These two vases couldn't get on the plane. Because Zhang Hai didn't bring these things when he came here. If you bought them in Miami, where did you buy them? Do you have an invoice? Do you have a receipt? Did you pay taxes? If you said you picked them up, where did you pick them up? Do you have any witnesses? Is it smuggled? If you want to get on the plane, Zhang Hai has his own plane, so it's much easier. But if you don't have one, it's very troublesome. It was because he figured this out, or maybe because he was paranoid, that Zhang Hai didn't choose to go back to sell it, but was ready to sell it here. I'm not very clear about the situation here, but if it's real, we can find an auction house. Those guys will always have a way. When it came to his profession, Moses, Adams became serious. He didn't consider the problem that Zhang Hai's porcelain was fake, because although he didn't know what Zhang Hai's background was, it seemed that Zhang Hai had never been deceived in this regard. If he said it was real, then it was real. But to be honest, he didn't know much about porcelain, so he was a little confused. Are we still looking for an auction house? To be honest, Zhang Hai didn't have a good impression of auction houses. Christie's and Sotheby's, for some historical reasons, made Zhang Hai, who had always thought that he was a descendant of the Yellow Emperor, disdain to look for these two companies. In the past, Phillips had deceived him, which made him a little unhappy. But unfortunately, it was said that only after 3 generations of wealth could one be considered a noble. This was because at that time, not only would one have settled down, even one's social network would have been very wide. Unlike the current Zhang Hai, his connections were pitifully narrow. At the very most, he only knew Pro Walton among the upper-class people in the United States, and the two were in a cooperative relationship. Of course, if the old man Zhang Dihai was also an American, then he would add one more. However, these two people clearly had nothing to do with connections. What's more, the relationship between Zhang Hai and them was not particularly good. It was to the point that he could entrust them to help him sell these priceless treasures. From the looks of it, this seems to be the only way. He touched his chin. Although he didn't want to deal with Phillips again, if he wanted to go out, it seemed that this was the only way. As for selling privately to the rich people here, Zhang Hai wasn't that stupid. Those people were the local tyrants here. If the other party wanted to take advantage of him, then Zhang Hai would be in trouble. So after hesitating for a long time, Zhang Hai decided to contact Phillips' people. It wasn't the first time that Phillips' people and Zhang Hai cooperated. When Moses Adams called their headquarters, in less than 2 hours, the local people of Phillips came over. It was a small team, including 3 appraisal experts and 2 people in charge of negotiating the price. Of course, if everything was negotiated, there would be people in charge of transportation. Zhang Hai didn't care about transportation. Hello, Mr. Zhang Hai. Thank you for trusting Phillips again. The leader of the 5 people who came over seemed to be a Latin American, but he also looked like an Arab. Well, Zhang Hai really couldn't tell which country these people's faces were from, but his English was quite good. Hello, this time these are the things. You can take a look first, and then we can negotiate the price. After Zhang Hai shook hands with this person, he showed the things behind him. In his big bag, it was impossible to only contain these 2 vases. There were a lot of things in that big bag. He got a lot of gold coins, silver coins, and jewelry from the first warehouse. This was because he also wanted to know the value of these things. Jiang Hai didn't take back all the armor in the last warehouse. Because the armor itself wasn't small, and Jiang Hai didn't know the price of the armor, so in the end, he only took a skirt back. In this way, a lot of things were placed on the table, and it looked really colorful. Of course. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the person in charge here also nodded to the 3 people behind him. These 3 people also had their own jobs. One of them was a middle-aged man from Huaxia, who specialized in appraising porcelain. The other 2 were white people. One specialized in appraising gems, and the other specialized in appraising deposits and silver coins. They were also people who came based on Jiang Hai's things. These people were very professional. After getting Jiang Hai's permission, they began to study their own things. After about an hour, these people put down the things in their hands and whispered to the 2 people in charge for a while. Then the 2 people also knew the specific situation and sat opposite Jiang Hai. Mr. Jiang Hai, congratulations. These things are all real. Do you want to sell them? Looking at Jiang Hai, the person in charge here said very seriously. Hearing this, Jiang Hai nodded. Why would he look for them if he didn't want to sell them? Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, the person here also took out a piece of paper and started to quote according to the things on it. If you want to sell, our company also told us that we don't need to play word games with you, so I'll just quote directly. Our company offers $1 million for your pair of blue and white porcelain vases, $1,000 for each gold coin, $300 for each silver coin, $150 for this ruby, $120,000 for this sapphire. But before he finished, Jiang Hai interrupted him. Wait. How much is this pair of blue and white porcelain vases? For Jiang Hai, the most expensive blue and white porcelain was naturally the Yuan dynasty blue and white porcelain. But the Ming dynasty blue and white porcelain was also quite valuable. What did this guy mean? A pair of Dragon Phoenix Ming dynasty blue and white porcelain vases was only worth $1 million? Was he playing with him? Seeing Jiang Hai's confusion, the appraiser said, Mr. Jiang, your vases are real, but that's all they're worth. Chapter 295. The appraiser spoke in Chinese to Jiang Hai, and Jiang Hai understood what he was saying, but he still found it hard to believe. Didn't they say that blue and white porcelain was extremely expensive? Why was there such a huge discrepancy between the price of this toy and the price in his heart? In his opinion, this set of porcelain could be sold for 20 or 30 million, even if it couldn't be sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. But what the hell was this 1 million yuan? Did these guys think that he didn't know anything? The middle-aged man noticed the dissatisfaction on Jiang Hai's face, so he started to explain to Jiang Hai. Mr. Jiang, this set of porcelain is indeed from the Ming dynasty, and it's well preserved. It's from the Wanli period of the Ming dynasty, but because it's from the Wanli period, it's not worth much. Looking at Jiang Hai, the middle-aged man began to explain to Jiang Hai that porcelain was worth a lot of money. But in ancient times, porcelain was even more valuable. It was impossible for the Chinese to not know this, especially when porcelain was sold to the West. It was truly priceless. This point was very tempting to the Chinese merchants in China. But in that era, there was a clear prohibition, and rulers were not allowed to go out to sea. If they couldn't go, they could only rely on those Western merchants to sell these things. China's maritime ban had existed since ancient times. Almost all Huaxia people regarded the Song dynasty as the best era. In fact, there was a maritime ban in the Song dynasty. In the history of the Song dynasty, it was recorded in Taizong's annals. It said that in the second year of Yongxi, 985, in September, Zhao Guangyi banned merchants from the sea. This represented the Song dynasty. From the beginning, merchants were not allowed to go out to sea. Later on, sea merchants might go secretly, but at least they didn't dare to do it openly. Later on, in the Yuan dynasty, the people of the Yuan dynasty didn't know anything about the navy. Just like the burden in Crosstalk now Mongolia, the commander of the navy, where did the sea come from? So in the Yuan dynasty, the maritime ban was very strong. Later on, in the Ming dynasty, it was naturally stronger. When Zhu Di was still in power, he had sent Zhang He to the west. However, after Zhang He came back, he told Zhu Di that the west was rich in resources, but they were poor. They did not have any strategic reserves such as gold, silver, and copper. The fruits and sugarcane that they produced were also useless to Xueqi. In that era, the common people could not afford to eat sweets, but the high officials and nobles ate sweets. Naturally, they could use beets to make sweets. There was also the consideration of guarding against the pirates in Japan. That was why they went into seclusion. During the Qing dynasty they had reached a peak. However, although they were not allowed to go out to sea, the people in the court and the merchants were not fools. They didn't want to be sea merchants, but these foreigners came to buy their porcelain. Naturally, they wouldn't be polite. Therefore, during the Wanli dynasty, he saw a business opportunity in this. At that time, the imperial court had abolished the sea ban. Also, he specially made a foreign trade blue and white porcelain for these Western merchants. The quality was naturally about the same as the Chinese porcelain. It was slightly worse than the ones for the inner palace, but it was still better than the ones in the merchant's house. Because the porcelain was sold to foreigners, there were dragons, immortals, phoenixes, kirans, etc. It was not taboo. But the price was naturally different. This kind of porcelain was very common in the Wanli dynasty and Longqing dynasty. It was because of the foreign trade system that Xueqi's porcelain was sold all over the world in that era. Now that 400 years had passed, these porcelains had become antiques, but there was a problem. That was, there were too many of these porcelains. Almost any auction house in the country had such porcelains, and the fake ones might be more expensive than the real ones. In China, to be honest, a single plum bottle like yours is sold for about 2 million to 5 million renminbi. If you don't believe me, you can check it yourself. You are also Chinese, and you have such power in the United States. I think it's not troublesome for you to check the price in China. The reason why I asked for more than 6 million renminbi and 1 million renminbi is mainly because you have a pair, so on the basis of multiplying the price by 2, I increased the price by more than 1 million. Seeing that he had explained it to Zhang Hai clearly, the middle-aged man here was a little embarrassed. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai hesitated for a moment. Put these 2 bottles here first. Let's talk about other things first. Although he was a little convinced now, he still wanted to ask about China. While texting Fu Yuan and the others, Zhang Hai said to the person on the other side. The person on the other side didn't care when he heard Zhang Hai's words. A bottle worth 1 million RMB was not a treasure for them, so they continued to quote the price. At this time, Su Wei and the others in China also sent a message back to Zhang Hai. He told Zhang Hai that what the man said was indeed true. A porcelain bottle from the Wanli period was indeed worth a lot of money. A porcelain bottle was enough to buy a house in the capital's 5th Ring Road, but it was impossible to add more than that. For an ordinary person, several million RMB was a lot of money, but for Zhang Hai, it was really a bit of a loss. Just as he finished asking, the person on the other side also quoted the full price for the pile of things. Zhang Hai's 2 bottles were only worth 1 million RMB, and the pile of money and jewelry that he didn't care about was worth 3 million renminbi in total. This made Zhang Hai feel a little helpless, and he shook his head with a bitter smile. It was a consolation prize after all. These jewels took up less than 1% of the space in that cabin at most. If these were worth 3 million renminbi, then the ship's worth of jewels would be worth 200 or 300 million RMB when they went back. This time, it wasn't a waste of effort. Since they had already negotiated, Zhang Hai didn't lower the price, and the other side gave a very honest price. Zhang Hai directly sold the jewels and the pair of porcelain bottles, and the 3 million renminbi was directly transferred to Zhang Hai's account. These people immediately contacted the headquarters. Although 3 million RMB worth of jewels wasn't very high, it was still quite valuable. At least, they couldn't afford it, so it was best to inform the company's security to come and get it. Watching them wrap these things up one by one, Zhang Hai suddenly saw the dress he had been putting in the distance. Hey, didn't you see this? Walking over and picking up the dress, Zhang Hai asked with some surprise. This is also a collection? Looking at this metal dress that seemed to have just been made, a few people couldn't help but ask with some doubts. Of course, these things were collected together. This thing has a history of nearly 400 years. Hearing these people's doubts, Zhang Hai said naturally, but he was just saying. The pair of porcelain bottles he was particularly interested in didn't sell for a price. This set of armor that didn't seem to be worn by humans at all, what price could it be sold for? But as the saying goes, A thief doesn't leave empty-handed. Bah, he's not a thief, and he won't leave empty-handed anyway. This thing was placed at the bottom of the sea. If it could be sold for money, it would be great, even if it was only worth a few 100,000. Nearly 400 years? This is a battle dress? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, a white man who didn't care about it suddenly widened his eyes. He immediately took the dress and looked at it carefully. The original position of the dress was far away from them. At first, these people thought that this was an ashtray that was deliberately made old, but now when Jiang Hai said it, their eyes lit up. The time to study this battle dress was much more than the time to study other things. Nearly 2 hours, when the security guards came, they specially asked these people to bring some new research equipment over. They worked there until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The 3 people here raised their heads. While their faces were covered with sweat, there was also a trace of joy and excitement. Mr. Jiang Hai, I don't know if the other matching armor of this battle dress is in your hands, or only this battle dress. After the 3 people whispered to their leader, the man who didn't know whether he was from Latin America or the Middle East couldn't help but be stunned. He then respectfully came in front of Jiang Hai and asked seriously to Jiang Hai. Oh, I have a set, but I put it somewhere else. When he heard this person's words, Jiang Hai was also stunned. Is this battle dress very valuable? Therefore his attitude, which was originally not too concerned, instantly changed at this moment. If my team didn't guess wrong, then this set of battle armor should have been specially made by Philip III. It's his exclusive battle armor. Moreover, it's a new set of battle armor. The man looked at Jiang Hai and said with a serious expression. Wait, what, Philip or sirloin, I don't care. This set of armor, is it very valuable? Hearing that this person seemed to want to give a long explanation about Philip III, Jiang Hai immediately stretched out his hand and stopped him. At the beginning, he told Jiang Hai about the Wanli year. Jiang Hai might be interested in listening. However, when he talked about the history of Europe, Jiang Hai didn't have the mood to listen. He directly interrupted him and asked the question he was most concerned about. This is not a matter of money. Well, business is business. If you decide to sell this item, it is estimated that it will be difficult for our company to pay for it alone. So, in my opinion, you should auction it. Because when the time comes, even if you deduct the tax, you will earn much more than we think. Looking at Jiang Hai, the man's eyes were about to burst into flames. It was obvious that this was a huge sum of money. Can you be more specific? Squinting his eyes, Jiang Hai asked curiously. To be honest, he really didn't expect that the armor would be so valuable. It was so valuable that Philip didn't dare to accept it privately. This was a bit interesting. I've checked your transaction records. I'm sorry, but this is also a requirement of our work. We need to check your credibility. If we add up the price of the 2 items you've sold, it's probably worth about half a set of armor. Seeing the serious look on Jiang Hai's face, this person also spoke in a serious tone. He wasn't being an alarmist, he was an auctioneer. In such a case, he would only give a low estimate and not a high estimate. This is also his professional quality. Chapter 296. There are quite a few emperors called Philip III. Which one is the one I picked up? On the hotel's computer, Jiang Hai casually flipped through Wikipedia and said to Moses, Adams next to him. However, Adams was not so relaxed at this time. Since Philip's people left, he has been wiping his sweat. Indeed, he was shocked by Jiang Hai. He never thought that Jiang Hai would have Philip III armor. The so-called Philip III has a lot of introductions on the internet, but there are only 5 main monarchs. The king of the Agid dynasty in the Macedonian period, the king of the Capet dynasty in France, the king of the Evreux dynasty, and a duke of the Burgundy-Valois dynasty, but the only one that can be matched is the king of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. According to the words of the expert, this Philip III armor should be new. Jiang Hai combined the historical background and political situation at that time, and he probably guessed that it should be like this. The original Europeans occupied America mainly to plunder the population and resources here to build gold mines. The gold mines in America are naturally more than those in Europe. Of course, Asia also has a lot, but for the Europeans in the 16th century, they can't beat the Asians. They occupied this place and mined the gold, so naturally, they wanted to give it to the Spanish emperor. Directly giving the gold was one thing, But the governor here also wanted to find ways to please the emperor, so he made this armor. At the same time, the merchants who went to Asia also brought back 2 porcelains and sent them together. But they didn't expect that before they could send them, they were taken by pirates. The Habsburg dynasty was once prominent in Europe and once ruled Spain and Portugal. Philip III was the child of Philip II's fourth wife, Archduchess Anna of Austria. When he inherited the throne, Philip III was also a famous Catholic, but unfortunately, he inherited his father's faith, but he didn't inherit his father's talent. He led the Spanish navy, which was the most powerful at that time, to gradually come to an end. Once, Philip II predicted that his son did not have the ability to manage the empire, and he will be controlled by the palace all his life. Later, it was proven that if Philip II did not become an emperor, he would not starve to death even if he became a prophet. As it turned out, Philip III was not a very controversial person, because he was rotten to the end. He had always liked the playful life of the court, and he squandered a lot of money on it. He almost destroyed the entire empire. After his good fortune in 1621, he left a tattered Spain to his successor. It could be said that he was a father who cheated his son. There was no other father who could compare to him. Perhaps his only political achievement was the marriage of his eldest daughter to Louis XIII, and the birth of Louis XIV, one of the greatest kings of France, but nothing else. Zhang Hai didn't care if this guy was dead or alive. His reputation had nothing to do with him. However, he was very interested in this set of armor. After these people left, Zhang Hai was thinking about how to get these treasures out. If it was like last night, running back and forth was really tiring, and the gains did not make up for the losses. So after thinking about it for a long time, Zhang Hai felt that he could drive a boat directly. Of course, an ordinary boat would definitely not work. A fishing boat would attract too much attention. After all, there were not many fish in that sea area. If a fishing boat was not enough, then he could only use a yacht. It was impossible for him to rent a yacht to others. If there were any surveillance cameras or something like that, then Zhang Hai would be in trouble. So after thinking about it, the only feasible thing was to buy a yacht. Fortunately, this thing was very big, so it was naturally very expensive. However, if the size was not too big, then it was not too big. After checking casually, there were not many places in Miami that sold other things, but there were a lot of places that sold yachts. Just like a certain place in China, there were also regular gatherings similar to the sea and the sky. Naturally, there were many places that sold yachts like this. Zhang Hai checked and found a lot of them. Well, I've decided. I'll buy a yacht and go out to sea to play. At night, I'll live on the sea. At night, I'll go into the water and do a little bit of work. After I'm done here, I'll drive the yacht back to Boston. After all, I'm a billionaire, and the most luxurious yacht is a fishing boat. I'm a little embarrassed. Looking at the yachts on the computer screen in front of him, Zhang Hai calculated in his heart. Behind Zhang Hai, Moses Adams was still calculating how much money it was. After dinner, Zhang Hai returned to his room. First, he called to ask how much money he had in his bank card. When Zhang Hai made this card, he had a total of $330 million. Later, he spent $280 million to buy the manor. The remaining $50 million had been squandered for the past half a year. Buying cars, renovating, buying boats, buying cows, buying fish seedlings, tidying up the wine manor, and paying salaries to Ai Dehua and the others. Adding everything together, the initial $50 million was long gone. After all, he had spent tens of millions on cattle and millions on fish seedlings. Although the car was a small sum, it was still a few $1,000,000. In addition, he had to pay taxes, go to the New York Beef Show, and do a series of other things. The $50 million had long been gone. If it weren't for the millions he had earned from selling fish and discovering gold coins, he might have gone bankrupt. Fortunately, he had survived the worst period of his life. Zhang Hai now had a balance of 273145559 in his Centurion card. 37. $10 million was a deposit from Perwalton, which meant that she had accepted all of Zhang Hai's cattle. If she didn't take them all in half a year, the $10 million would belong to Zhang Hai. Of course, the $10 million would still belong to Zhang Hai, but it would still be the cattle's money. Another $5 million was from Zhang Dihai, Grandpa Zhang. Friends were friends, and business was business. He had everything he needed. Another $5 million was from Qi Li. Like Grandpa Zhang, the $20 million was the deposit for his cattle. As for the remaining $7 million, $4 million was all he had, and $3 million was just transferred today. $27 million seemed a lot, but Zhang Hai didn't care too much about it. After all, if he sold more than 10,000 cattle, he would have to sell them at least 50 times more. That was his net worth. However, he still had to wait for all the cattle to be sold. There was still half a year, but he didn't have to wait for the auction this time. If that set of armor could really be sold for a sky-high price of $1 billion, even if he had to pay 35% of the tax, Zhang Hai could still get 65% of it back. That would be $650 million. In an instant, his slightly tight life would become rich. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai's heart, which was already very hot, was burning again. It's decided. That's it. Zhang Hai said seriously as he patted his bed. After getting up the next morning, Zhang Hai announced this to everyone. Because he felt that it was a little boring to play on land, he was going to buy a yacht and then go to the sea to play. But this time, in order to keep it a secret, only 8 girls, including Zhang Hai, Delina, Marion, and Aphrodite, would go to sea. Moses Adams was not among them. Moses Adams didn't care about this, although he knew that he hadn't gained Zhang Hai's 100% trust. This time, Zhang Hai was going to sea to get back the goods he had mentioned. Of course, he wouldn't know the location, but it was good enough that Zhang Hai revealed this information to him. What's more, Zhang Hai would use him in the auction later. He would continue to stay in Miami to eat, drink, and play. His life was wonderful. At the same time, when Zhang Hai went to sea, he had another task. Although the place where Zhang Hai went to sea this time was not far, if he encountered any danger, it would be very troublesome, so he needed to prepare weapons for Zhang Hai. When Moses Adams was busy, Zhang Hai also took a group of girls around him to the most famous yacht fair in Miami. When their car was parked in the parking lot, even Zhang Hai wanted to curse. What was a luxury car fair? This was it. In the parking lot, there were luxury cars everywhere at this time. Looking around, what was a Lamborghini, which was a Ferrari, Porsche, Bugatti, Bentley, Aston Martin, Alfa Romeo, Rolls-Royce, Maybach, and so on. Although some of the cars were only equipped with 13 sharp weapons, they were not as good as the cars in Zhang Hai's garage. But these cars were not bad. Driving a BMW 7 Series or a Mercedes-Benz S-Series here was really embarrassing. As for the Japanese cars, they were not allowed to enter at all. The only exception may be Lexus. Seeing Zhang Hai and his group get out of the car, many young people who were gathered in the distance and bragging couldn't help but focus their eyes on them. Some of them were even bold enough to whistle. Perhaps in their eyes, Aphrodite and the other girls were probably peripheral girls. After all, they were dressed rather well, but they were far from being able to walk around here. Besides, even if they were really rich girls, it wasn't as if they couldn't hook up with them. Looking at the faces of these guys, Zhang Hai looked at them with disdain. These guys were showing off, he endured it. But if they dared to show off, then he didn't mind letting them know why the flowers were so red. He had a bad temper. Chapter 297. Miami was worthy of its reputation as the city of sin and God's reception room. Zhang Hai led Aphrodite and the others from the parking lot into the harbor in front of them and saw a completely different scene. It was just a door. Outside the door was the normal world, but inside the door was another world, the world of the rich. Zhang Hai looked around and saw that at this time, in a small harbor specially opened in the harbor of Miami, countless yachts were docked there. Unlike the small boats in China that dared to call themselves yachts, the yachts here were all very large. The small ones were more than 30 meters long, with 2 or 3 floors, so people could clearly distinguish them from fishing boats and the like at a glance. Zhang Hai's target was these guys. In front of these yachts, in addition to some muscular men acting as the bodyguards of the yachts, there were more men. There were also some women wearing very revealing clothes. These women were all quite young. Basically, they were in their 20s, with all kinds of skin colors and styles, but all of them had delicate faces and perfect figures. After all, these girls counted on these things to make a living. Some of these women were socialites, but most of them were models. They were different from those in China who dared to call themselves otaku goddesses on the internet after taking a few sets of photos. These models were all real. Every year, They flew all over the world to walk on the runway, but the salary of a model was not as good as imagined. It was not a bad choice to marry a diamond old man when they were the youngest and most beautiful. Of course, if it was just one night or finding a lover, they had to think about it. These girls were not a one-time deal. Looking at their gorgeously dressed appearance, if you wanted to dump them, you would have to pay a piece of meat. At this time, they gathered in groups of 3 or 5 in front of some yachts or some old men to show themselves. Of course, the bigger the yacht, the more people gathered. Of course, where there were more people, there was more competition, and the chances of being selected were much lower. Therefore, some women who were not very good conditions and were a little older, but were still very beautiful, chose small yachts. Even if they could not catch a few $1 billion, it was still a good choice to catch a few tens of millions. In front of these yachts, there were also many men. Some of these men were young, but most of them were not young. Men in their 30s, 40s, and even the most mainstream ones were men in their 50s or 60s. They mingled among the hot girls, taking advantage of them and telling dirty jokes, causing the girls to grumble. Originally, Aphrodite and the others were very conspicuous outside, but after entering this place, Aphrodite and the others were not so conspicuous. After all, their pretty faces didn't have much of an advantage here. Compared to a group of people with 30 points, a 90-point face was naturally as beautiful as a fairy. However, if the people around her were all in the 70s or 80s, then it wouldn't be too eye-catching. Moreover, they were dressed very conservatively. Of course, this was based on the current conditions here. "Sir, what can I do for you?" Just as Zhang Hai and the others walked in, 2 men wearing tight black vests at the door came over. These 2 guys were black, both with big bald heads. The vests were tight on their muscles, looking very fierce, giving people an inexplicable sense of oppression. "I'm here to buy a yacht." Looking at the yachts in front of him, Zhang Hai was thinking about what to buy. "Sir, where is your invitation letter?" Hearing Zhang Hai casually say that he wanted to buy a yacht, the black man couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Because now the whole world knows that Huaxia people are rich, but this is not a place where people can casually enter. "I don't have that kind of thing, is this okay?" Zhang Hai didn't make things difficult for these security guards, but directly showed his black gold card. Sometimes, this thing is the most symbolic existence. If someone can afford it, then they are not ordinary people. "Oh, I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. You are the owner inside. Do you need a shopping guide?" Seeing Zhang Hai's black gold card, the security guard was not inexperienced. He immediately retreated to the side respectfully. He couldn't afford to offend this person. "Yes, call one for me." Hearing this person's words, Zhang Hai also nodded. He didn't know how to choose. Seeing that Zhang Hai seemed to really want to buy a yacht, the security guard here immediately said, "Please wait a moment." After waiting for about 5 minutes, a figure quickly ran over from afar. This figure was a woman who looked to be 26 or 27 years old. She was a standard blonde American. She was not ugly, with slightly curly hair tied into a ponytail behind her head. She also wore a pair of black glasses on her face. He was wearing a white shirt on his upper body, but the top 3 buttons of this shirt were not fastened. Originally, when he stood on the ground, he could see a huge ravine. Now that he was running, it was really a bit of a reversal of 3 views. She wore a short skirt that was just short enough to cover the most important part of her body, and a pair of black high heels. He had to admit that this woman should have practiced. The high heels were about 10 centimeters high, but she could still run. "Hello, sir. Are you the one who wants to buy a yacht? I am your shopping guide. My name is Jennifer." The girl ran all the way to Zhang Hai and deliberately put her hands on her knees. She bent down so that Zhang Hai could pay attention to this pair of existences that could topple his worldview. After looking at them for more than 10 seconds, the girl didn't seem to notice at all. At this time, she slowly stood up and said with a smile. But as soon as she raised her head, she saw Aphrodite and the others beside Zhang Hai shooting their gazes at her like sharp arrows. Except for Delina and Marion, who maintained an indifferent state, they clearly saw this woman's movements. However, they couldn't do anything to Zhang Hai, so they could only secretly guard against this guy. However, this guy didn't care about the hostility of Aphrodite and the others. Selling a yacht was actually similar to selling a car or a house. One must know that the commission of this kind of thing is also very high. It can make a lot of money, So what's wrong with selling one's body? Cough. Oh, hello, my surname is Jiang. Let's go first. You can introduce me to the one I like. Perhaps feeling the awkward atmosphere in the air, Jiang Hai smiled and walked forward. Jennifer also smiled and walked to Jiang Hai's side, leading Jiang Hai to the yachts in the distance. It is said that the richest people play with yachts. Originally, Jiang Hai didn't care about it, but after taking a closer look, he found it to be true. How expensive can the most expensive car be? Of course, it's not limited edition or made of gold. It's the kind of car that can be bought with money. Some people say that it's a gold supercar, a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, a Lamborghini Hermes, etc. But in fact, these three cars are all nonsense, especially the last one. It's just a concept car. It hasn't even been produced. How can it be worth 380 million renminbi? Currently, the most expensive car in the market is the Bugatti series, and it's a Veyron convertible. It's about 40 million renminbi. Converted to USD, it's about 7 million renminbi. Of course, there might be other cars that are more expensive than this one, but it's the best car that can be bought. Planes are more expensive than cars. If a plane is bought well and has good configuration, 20 to 30 million renminbi will be more than 100 million renminbi. The most expensive ones could even reach 100 million yuan. However, 100 million yuan was already quite good. It might not be the best, but it was still the best. But if it's a yacht, well, 100 million renminbi is just the starting line. Of course, we're talking about dollars here. It wouldn't be interesting if we were talking about dollars. The yachts that Jiang Hai and the others were looking at were arranged in alphabetical order. The first one was Azimuth's brand, a top Italian yacht brand. This year, they were mainly promoting a small yacht, Azimuth 95, with a price of $9 million. This was a very low configuration. If you want a good one, it would cost $12 million. Don't look at the price because this yacht was really small. 97 feet. This is a unit of length for yachts, feet. Converted to meters, the captain was less than 30 meters. Are you kidding? Jiang Hai is only looking at the yacht. Even 30 meters is too big for him. Jiang Hai had bragged so much just now. All the yachts with more than 100 million renminbi are big yachts. A 30-meter yacht is too big for Jiang Hai. After all, he only has 27 million renminbi in total. Behind Azimuth are the French brand Bonatter and Guada's BV. BV is similar to Azimuth. They are all small yachts with a length of about 30 meters. There are only 5 types of yachts, and all of them are priced at more than 10 million renminbi. The Germans' products were very sturdy. This was something they had in common, but the price they sold them at was also unusually high. But compared to BV, Bonatter's yachts are much cheaper. They also have bigger yachts with a length of more than 30 meters. But most of them are small boats, and some are even 6 to 7 meters long. They are as big as the yachts in China. But the appearance and equipment of these yachts are different. They are more like speedboats than yachts. Jiang Hai looked at a few larger yachts, that is, 11 or 12 meters long double-decker yachts, which were like this. It really wasn't that expensive. The $1.5 million for a 12-meter room was all well equipped, including GPS, leather upholstery, and so on. There were 3 guest rooms in total. 1 master bedroom, 2 guest bedrooms, and a lounge that could be used for a party. It's not a problem to accommodate a dozen people. To be honest, this is what Jiang Hai wants to buy. The other 11-meter yacht is only 860,000 renminbi. The only problem is that the bedroom is a little small. Chapter 298. Jiang Hai looked very generous at times, but he was actually quite stingy at other times. He didn't care about small amounts of money, just like when he was earning 3,000 a month, he didn't care about the 8 or 10 yuan. Now that he was rich, earning more than $1 billion a year, he didn't care about 3,000 or 5,000, but that didn't mean he didn't care about tens of millions. The yacht that cost more than 10 million was beautiful, but to be honest, Jiang Hai felt a little guilty about it. Compared to the yacht that cost more than 10 million, he felt that the yacht that cost more than 1 million was not bad. However, although Jiang Hai thought so, he didn't say it out loud. Instead, he continued to walk forward with the woman in front of him. After walking past the shipyards that started with B, they came to the ones that started with C. There were only 2 brands here. One was a local American brand, Corona. This company was originally established in Wellington, Illinois. It was really a small shipyard back then. The place where the company installed the interior of the yacht was an empty gym in a school. It was just established in 1991, but it had already gained some fame in the past 20 years. This shipyard specialized in selling small boats. Rather than yachts, it was better to say that they were speedboats. The biggest one was only about 10 meters long, and the price was quite cheap. It belonged to the American price range. An 8-person boat about 7 meters long only cost $120,000, and they were all well decorated. They could be driven away directly after refueling. Zhang Hai didn't care about this level of yacht. The other one that started with C was Italy's Calanci, which was a little bigger than Corona. However, it was limited, and Zhang Hai didn't really like it. As they walked forward, they came to the ones that started with D. However, once they got closer, Zhang Hai was a little surprised, because the boats that started with D made Zhang Hai a little confused. DHC. Looking at the row of yachts in front of him, Zhang Hai asked with some doubts. Yes, this is a boat made by Hua Xiao's Red Double Happiness shipyard, and it sells quite well here. It's a small yacht, and the largest one is 26 feet, nearly 8 meters, long. The fresh water tank can hold 2,000 liters, and the fuel tank can hold 4,000 liters. It's a very good type, and the price is also very good. The French Bonadou you saw just now is about the same size as this one, and it costs about $700,000. However, this boat costs $550,000, so it can be said that it's a bargain. Seeing that Zhang Hai was interested in this brand, the shopping guide here immediately spoke. However, Zhang Hai just chuckled. To be honest, if he could, he was still willing to support domestic products. Anyone who lived in the country would know what the red double jiao was. That's for making table tennis, okay? Is the quality of table tennis the same as yachts? This time, Zhang Hai bought this boat only to fish for treasures. However, he didn't say that he would just throw it away after fishing for treasures. After all, he still had to drive back to Boston. Therefore, Zhang Hai just took a look and left. The shopping guide here was very good at reading people's expressions. When he saw Zhang Hai's expression, he knew that he had some understanding of Red Double Happiness, so he didn't say anything more. Next to Red Double Happiness, there was also a shipyard that started with D. However, the boats here were obviously a little different from the ones in front. The boats here were very beautiful. Really beautiful. Compared to the boats next to it, the boats here were like ordinary cars and concept cars. They were all cars, but they were particularly attractive at first glance. Basically, all the boats had 1.5 floors, which meant that there was a floor above the deck, and there was another floor below the deck. The whole boat was streamlined, and it looked like it could run very fast on the sea. The postmodern feeling was very cool. This is Della Pita, a shipyard with half a century of shipbuilding technology. It has very good technology. It can be said that in terms of technology, the boats in the shipyard are the best among all the boats here. However, the price-performance ratio is also the lowest. For example, the largest DP-70, which is only 91.92 feet long, is sold for $1.2 million. It's not worth it. Seeing Zhang Hai's gaze, the shopping guide introduced the boat. To be honest, she also liked this boat very much, but it was indeed not very suitable. When Zhang Hai heard the price, he couldn't help but twitch his mouth and continue walking. After D, it was E, and after E, it was F. 26 letters weren't that many, so Zhang Hai quickly finished looking through them. Among the hundreds of large and small yachts here, Zhang Hai only took a fancy to a few brands. After all, Zhang Hai didn't buy this boat for fun. He still had work to do. Therefore, this boat couldn't be too big. He could easily drive it himself, or he could ask Aphrodite and the others to help. This limited the length. For example, the boats from brands like Fei Emperor Star and Xueqi couldn't do. They were too big. Ordinary boats wouldn't do either. They were too small. Zhang Hai also wouldn't choose some boats that weren't expensive. In the end, with the help of the shopping guide, Zhang Hai chose a total of 6 boat types. The first model was the White Rabbit yacht from the Evolution shipyard. It had a total length of 61.4 feet, 18.7 meters, a total width of 15.4 feet, 4.7 meters, a fresh water storage of 15,000 liters, and a fuel storage of 94,500 liters. It was well equipped, but it was a little long. The second was the Heesan, 55M. This one was 54.99 feet, 16 meters, long. It had 3 floors, 30,000 liters of fresh water, and 125,000 liters of fuel. Its endurance was much better than the first model, but the first model was streamlined and ran fast. This one was slightly slower. At the same time, there were a lot of rooms. The whole boat had a total of 17 rooms. Zhang Hai and the others naturally couldn't live in them. However, Zhang Hai's favorite was the LSX 120 from a shipyard called Zalaza. This boat wasn't long, only 23 feet, which was about 10 meters, but it was really beautiful. The whole boat was built like a supercar. It was quite beautiful. There were corners, but the problem was that it was too small. If he bought it in Boston and went back to the manor to show off, Zhang Hai might buy one. However, in the current situation, Zhang Hai really didn't want to buy one. But he remembered it. He would buy it when he had time in the future. This boat was really to his liking. It was very beautiful. In addition to these 3 boats, according to Zhang Hai's requirements, the most recommended boat was the Sunbird. The boats developed by the Sunbird basically met Zhang Hai's requirements. It was about 20 meters in size, divided into 3 floors, and had many rooms. Most importantly, it was easy to drive. 2 people could drive the boat. One person was responsible for driving the boat, and the other person just had to watch and throw the rope. The entire ship had everything. It was specially prepared for those single men who like to go out alone or take a group of girls out to play. It was very much in line with Zhang Hai's positioning. Zhang Hai didn't go out to play. It was also because of this. This shipyard produced many boats, but the ones recommended to Zhang Hai were the Sao Paulo and Rafael. The Sao Paulo had 2 boats. The first was a 118-foot boat with a length of 35.9 feet, 11 meters. It was a little small, and Zhang Hai couldn't afford it. The second was a 138-foot boat with a length of 41.58 feet, 12.6 meters. It had 3 floors and a total of 8 rooms. This was very suitable for Zhang Hai's requirements. There was also Raphael's boat, which had a length of 45.7 feet, 14 meters. It was about the same size, but it only had 2 floors. But this one had a more postmodern feel. It looked very beautiful. The whole boat was airtight, and it looked like a fish. Although it wasn't as beautiful as Zara's boat, it had a strong metallic feel and strong edges. This boat looked very ostentatious, which was very suitable for Zhang Hai's requirements. But at the same time, it had a good appearance, so it naturally wasn't cheap. According to your requirements, I can give you a minimum of $35 million for this boat. If it's a 138-foot Sao Paulo boat, it'll be $45 million. Looking at Zhang Hai, Jennifer whispered to Zhang Hai, as if she was afraid that others would hear her. At this time, Zhang Hai was still hesitating. At first, he thought that the size of the ship was different, so the calculation was different. But now he realized that there was actually a big difference. In fact, yachts were indeed calculated according to their length. Yachts of 6, 7, or 8 meters rarely cost more than $1 million. Even for some very famous brands, yachts of this length were basically between $1 and $1.5 million. Of course, apart from some power sailboats, yachts were indeed very expensive. As for the boats between 10 meters and 15 meters, the price was uncertain. The cheapest boats were more than 1 million yuan. The 12 meters and 11 meters boats, like the French brand, were more than 1 million yuan. But the 13 meters and 14 meters boats could be sold for more than 2 million yuan or 3 million yuan. The boats between 15 meters and 20 meters could be sold for even higher prices. Heesan's yacht, 16 meters, was sold for $78 million. White Rabbit, more than 18 meters, was sold for $25 million. But after all, other people's yachts were indeed big. But this Raphael quietly asked for more than $5 million. Zhang Hai was a little nervous. If his $1 billion came into his account now, he would buy it. But the problem was that his money hadn't come into his account yet, so he was really reluctant to spend it. Seeing Jiang Hai's slightly tangled look, Jennifer didn't urge him. After all, it's a deal of millions of dollars. Even if he's rich, he still has to think about it carefully, especially when Jiang Hai doesn't seem to be very old. In Jennifer's opinion, Jiang Hai was probably a rich second-generation heir who took his family's money. He looked like he was almost 30 years old. It was impossible for him to spend money as recklessly as he did when he was in his early 20s or 17 or 18 years old. He had to think carefully about whether the money was worth it or not. At this time, it was only right to stay quiet. As for Aphrodite and the others, they were already speechless, because they didn't know what to say. These millions of dollars were already beyond what they could bear. They didn't understand why Jiang Hai wanted to buy this thing, but since it was Jiang Hai's decision, they couldn't say anything. At least in their opinion, these yachts were no different from the first boats. Chapter 299. Okay, I'll take it. After hesitating for about 5 minutes, Jiang Hai gritted his teeth and stomped his feet. He couldn't bear to part with his wife. Well, he really couldn't bear to part with his wife, but it wasn't Chile. But no matter what, he would still need to sail these ships in the future. Now, he would treat it as an investment. These ships would look very good in the future. Moreover, if his armor were to be sold for a good price, then he would be able to make a lot of money. Okay, I'll handle it for you now. After hearing Jiang Hai's hesitation, he clenched his teeth and agreed. Jennifer's eyes couldn't help but light up. It seems that this guy really doesn't lack money. It was said that Xueqi people were rich recently, but she hadn't seen much of it. After all, it was located on the East Coast. But now, Jiang Hai's straightforwardness had left a deep impression on her. It seems that Xueqi people are really rich. Hurry up, I don't know how long I can keep this up. Hearing Jennifer's words, Jiang Hai took a deep breath and handed over his Centurion black gold card. He tried his best not to look at it. It's too painful for him to do so. Okay, please wait a moment. After receiving Jiang Hai's black gold card, Jennifer immediately took the walkie-talkie to the side and began to talk to the people over there. Seeing that she was obviously avoiding everyone, Jiang Hai didn't want to eavesdrop. He just stood there and looked at the huge yacht in front of him. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Raphael, such a big name. I hope this ship is also a good one. At least, I won't regret it. Just as Jiang Hai was looking at the ship in front of him in a daze, a group of people suddenly came from a distance. The leader of these people was also a shopping guide, but she wasn't a beauty. Instead, she was a middle-aged man. This guy was a little bald, and he was wearing a suit on such a hot day in Miami. Zhao Yu had to admit that he was also a master. At this time, this guy's face was full of smiles, and he was kneeling and licking the man beside him. And the man beside him did have the need to kneel down and lick his boots, because this man was not an American. Instead, he was obviously an Arabian. He had yellow skin, big eyes, and a mustache. He was wearing a white coat, which was also a traditional Arabian costume. In the Arab world, this was the mainstream way of dressing. Suits and the like were not very common in the Arab world. Beside this person, there were 4 big men. At a glance, one could tell that they were bodyguards. At the same time, in the middle of these 4 people, there were 3 women. Their bodies were wrapped in thick black gauze. This was also the traditional Arabian dress. Under the lead of the Mediterranean man, this group of people slowly walked to the ship in front of Jiang Hai. Dear Mr. Defayman Vihar Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum, this is the ship I just told you about. Does the appearance meet your requirements? Although it's a little short for you, it's the best choice if you just want to take your wives and concubines out. This ship is really selling well. And now there's only one left. Standing in front of Jiang Hai, the Mediterranean man explained to the Arab tycoon beside him with a flattering smile. Originally, although they were a bit of an eyesore, Jiang Hai also knew that he couldn't afford to provoke an Arab tycoon, so he didn't care. He wasn't a person with 13 points. He didn't care about crashing into cars, so he naturally wouldn't care about crashing into a yacht. However, it seemed that the yacht they had their eyes on was his. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but frown and take a step forward. As soon as he moved, the 4 bodyguards beside the Arab tycoon reacted at the same time and looked at Jiang Hai with vigilance. In an instant, Jiang Hai's sensitive senses sensed the aura from these people. It was a fierce aura. If the 4 bodyguards that Zhang Hai encountered on Miami Beach were wolves, then these 4 were lions. These 4 fellows were like 4 lions. Whether it was in terms of experience or the amount of blood they could see, they were superior to them in every aspect. Although I don't want to disturb you, if this is really the last yacht, I think you might have come in vain. Unfortunately, for lions couldn't beat a dragon, so Zhang Hai didn't care about their aura at all. He continued to take a step forward and said to the shopping guide in front of him and the Arab man in front of him. What do you mean by that? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the shopping guide here couldn't help but be a little puzzled. He glanced at Zhang Hai. Although he knew that Xueqi people were very rich, it was obvious that the Xueqi people's money was not as rich as the Arab tycoon, especially the one beside him. To be precise, he was a member of the royal family. He had to curry favor with him, so when he spoke to Zhang Hai, his tone was not very good. The Arab man here also looked at Zhang Hai with some doubts. What else could it mean? I'll buy this yacht. My shopping guide has already paid over there. Shrugging his shoulders, Zhang Hai said lightly. As Zhang Hai's finger pointed in that direction, several people on this side also saw Jennifer, who was walking back. At this time, Jennifer didn't know the situation here. She just called the supervisor here and confirmed the amount in Zhang Hai's card on the phone. Now the staff is driving a car quickly to deliver the contract. As long as Zhang Hai signs the contract and swipes the card, the yacht will completely belong to him. Now Jennifer was about to come over to talk to Zhang Hai about this, but she saw that Zhang Hai unknowingly got involved with other people. The most important thing is that she also saw a person she didn't like to see among these people. Jennifer, is this your customer? Seeing Jennifer coming over, the Mediterranean man couldn't help but ask sharply. Yes, Manager Baron. I don't know what's the problem. While respectfully handing the card back to Zhang Hai, Jennifer said to the man indifferently. It can be seen that she is not very afraid of this man. Now I declare that the yacht you sold is invalid. You can take your customer to see other yachts. Hearing Jennifer's disdainful tone, the middle-aged man's face changed, and he said with a tough face. Oh, I'm sorry, Manager Baron. I have reported this matter to Manager Davis. He is now sending someone here to deliver the contract, and the transaction has been recorded in the computer. You don't have the final say in this matter. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of her, Jennifer smiled. Although this man is a manager and has a higher rank than her, but he is not her direct superior, Jennifer is really not afraid of him. What's more, she is also a gold salesperson. This person does not have the ability to fire her, nor does he have the ability to make things difficult for her. Calling him manager is already giving him face. Americans and Chinese people are indeed a little different, at least in terms of their attitude towards work. They don't care what their superiors think. You use Davis to pressure me? Hearing Jennifer's words, the middle-aged man couldn't help but say with anger in his eyes. It's not a problem of pressure. We sell yachts, of course, it's first come, first served. There is no problem with this. Even if you call the head office, I will say the same thing. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of her, Jennifer's words were very tough. They sell yachts. Although it's not that they don't open for 3 years, but once they open for 3 years, it's not much different. Zhang Hai's yacht is $35 million. She can at least take 5% of it, which is nearly $300,000. Wanting to take out the money that she had already earned from her pocket was a fool's dream. You! Hearing Jennifer ignore him, the middle-aged man was quite upset, and then he wanted to say something. In his opinion, this Jennifer is really too ignorant. Let's not talk about whether the yacht is profitable or not. An opportunity to please the Middle Eastern tycoon is in front of him. If he doesn't cherish it, he will really be struck by lightning. As for Zhang Hai, he is rich, but he is a Xueqi. He can bring him many other things. This woman doesn't even think about it. She is really stupid. Well, Mr. Baron, I think this lady is right about one thing. Seeing that Baron was about to explode, Zhang Hai was also ready to fight. Although he is not as rich as the Middle Eastern tycoon, he still likes to make a big deal out of this. But just as he was getting ready to fight, the Middle Eastern tycoon suddenly spoke. Mr. Du Feynman Vihar Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum, what do you mean? Hearing that the Middle Eastern tycoon spoke, Baron also suppressed his anger in an instant and asked carefully. Since this gentleman bought this boat first, then we won't buy it. You have to pay attention to the rules in everything, don't you think so, mister? Hearing Baron's words, the Middle Eastern tycoon chuckled. For these Middle Eastern tycoons, money is really just a string of numbers. And their identity makes them not very interested in using power and money to suppress people. Of course, the premise is that the other party is equal to them. Although this Middle Eastern tycoon doesn't know Zhang Hai's net worth, looking at his appearance, it doesn't prevent him from regarding Zhang Hai as equal to himself. So after listening to these words, he took the initiative to speak to Zhang Hai. Hearing his words, Baron, who was still a bit hostile, just opened his mouth and didn't say anything. Since the Middle Eastern tycoon he wants to please doesn't care about this yacht, he obviously doesn't want to offend Zhang Hai. Chapter 300. After the voice of the Middle Eastern local tycoon fell, there was nothing more to say about the yacht. The Middle Eastern local tycoon just nodded to Zhang Hai and turned to leave. As for Baron, his expression was a little awkward. Just now, with the support of the Middle Eastern local tycoon, he naturally spoke very arrogantly. But when the Middle Eastern local tycoon left, he saw Zhang Hai and felt a little awkward. As the saying goes, no matter who you offend in the United States, don't offend the rich. A person who could afford a yacht of more than $5 million and had a group of beautiful girls around him was obviously not someone he could afford to offend. So after the Middle Eastern local tycoon left, he also nodded to Zhang Hai and left with his tail between his legs. Looking at the backs of the two people leaving, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smack his lips as if he hadn't had enough. According to his thinking, under such circumstances, shouldn't the other party come to find trouble with him? They might be looking down on him, oppressing him with power or money, and then he would fight back and slap them in the face to create a small climax. Generally, this was the arrangement of a melodramatic plot. But it seemed that God didn't give him such a chance. Before he could slap them in the face, these people left. In fact, Zhang Hai did think a little too much. Of course, it was also possible that he had just entered the upper circle, so he wasn't too clear. There were many brainless second generations in the world, but these brainless people were divided into real brainless and fake brainless. Those who were truly brainless were either dead or had caused their families to be destroyed, regardless of whether it was at home or abroad. Some brainless people were fake brainless. They deliberately pretended to be like this, mainly to live a happy life and not let their opponents guard against them. This was also a way to protect themselves. As for those second generations who wandered outside, each one was more cunning than the other, because if there was any mistake, the other party would seize the opportunity to destroy their families. Those who really understood this principle naturally received such education from an early age. The nouveau riche of the Middle East had been rich for many years, so they knew that there was nothing wrong with flaunting their wealth. It was also nothing to make some people jealous because they would not pose a threat to themselves. However, flaunting their wealth to the point of making enemies with the whole world was courting death. At least in the circle of the rich, it was better to have one more friend than one more enemy. The fact that Zhang Hai could buy a yacht that cost more than $5 million without batting an eyelid was proof that he wasn't a regular businessman. For someone like him, even if his status was not as high as his, there was no need to make enemies. Moreover, it was just a yacht. Why would he care? As for the issue of face that some people talked about, for the Arab tycoons they were members of the royal family. The only thing they needed was to let their people know how great and magnanimous they were, and not use money to take revenge on others. To these people, as well as the nobles and the rich, reputation was much more important than face. Moreover, he probably wouldn't have considered the issue of face if he let a ship pass. After the Middle Eastern nouveau riche left, things became much simpler. Soon, a staff member came over with the contract. Zhang Hai also signed on it, and then directly transferred a total of $573 million. The extra money was the money to pay taxes. In the United States, whether it was buying or selling things, one had to pay taxes. It was a two-way tax. Therefore, one had to admit that the taxes here were really heavy. Fortunately, it was more than $5 million, and Zhang Hai could still afford it. However, when he saw the notification on his phone that the money in his bank account had shrunk by 1/5, Zhang Hai still felt a little distressed. Fortunately, he would soon find a way to make a lot of money. After the ship was returned to Zhang Hai, Jennifer also called a captain and brought Zhang Hai onto the ship. On the ship, she explained to Zhang Hai how to operate the ship. When Zhang Hai was in Winthrop, he had learned how to operate a ship from Ai Dehua and the others. Compared to the complicated fishing boats, this yacht was much more convenient. After all, there was no sonar or fish repellent, and there was no need to control the arms, winches, and other things. There were originally dozens of buttons, but there were only 5 or 6 in total. It was almost the same as driving a car. A series of buttons, such as radio, speedometer, fuel gauge, anchor up, anchor down, etc. Zhang Hai had already memorized it after 10 minutes. Then, he deliberately drove the ship out for a spin. After making sure that he knew how to operate it, the captain left. Zhang Hai also drove the ship to the designated parking spot at the port. Because Zhang Hai bought the ship here, he had a free parking spot. The first 3 years were free, and after the 4th year, he would have to pay some money, but it wasn't much. It could be considered as a benefit that Jennifer fought for him. For Zhang Hai, this parking spot was still somewhat useful, because he estimated that he wouldn't only come here once. After everything was done with the ship, Zhang Hai, Aphrodite, and the others also sat in the commercial car and returned to the hotel. However, he didn't notice that after his car left the parking lot, a Land Rover on the other side of the street also started its engine and followed Zhang Hai's car, following them at a leisurely pace. It wasn't until Zhang Hai and the others were about to arrive at the hotel that the car turned and left Zhang Hai's car. When Zhang Hai's car arrived at the hotel, in another car opposite the hotel, someone sat up. "Boss, the target you asked us to keep an eye on has returned to the hotel. It seems that they just went to buy a yacht today. These damn rich people." Seeing Zhang Hai and the 10 girls walking into the hotel, a black man sitting in the driver's seat spoke in Spanish to the person on the other side of the phone. "Hey, little Terry, don't worry. If these rich people didn't create conflicts, we wouldn't have the opportunity to make such a big profit. Keep an eye on him. I feel that this guy should have received some news recently, so he doesn't come out during the day. Does he think that he is safe during the day? Ridiculous." Listening to the black man's words, a rough voice came from the other side of the phone. In the middle of this voice, there were also some women's voices. As for what they were doing, there was no need to say. Hearing the boss's words, little Terry couldn't help but smile. Thinking of that fat sheep, it seems that they made a lot of money this time. At this time, Zhang Hai naturally didn't know about this. After returning to the hotel, he went to the nearby outdoor goods store to buy some things. Although it was a yacht, some outdoor goods were still indispensable. It's better to be safe than sorry. Therefore, Zhang Hai prepared a lot of things like life buoys, survival suits, smoke bombs, indicator lights, diving suits, and so on. Originally, he also wanted to buy a few more fire extinguishers, but considering that there were already some on the yacht, he didn't buy them. After buying these things, Zhang Hai went to buy some wine as well as some food. There were barbecue racks and other things on the ship. Naturally, there was a reason why the ship was so expensive. Zhang Hai was very well equipped with everything he needed. The kitchen was even more complete than Zhang Hai's house. This was also the reason why Aphrodite and the other girls were half crazy after boarding the yacht. It was really great. After buying a lot of things and filling his car, Zhang Hai waited for the arrival of Moses Adams. Moses Adams came back at 6 o'clock in the evening. He specially prepared some toys for Zhang Hai. "What are those things you're holding? Automatic rifles? Are those RPGs? There is also a sniper rifle. My God, am I going to South America to fight?" Originally, Zhang Hai only prepared some ordinary guns, plus some spear guns. Looking at the things in the big bag in front of him, he couldn't help but hesitate. If he didn't know Moses Adams's background, he would have thought that he was possessed by a South American drug lord. How did he get these toys? "Hey boss, these are actually just some small toys. Who asked you to not bring me along this time? You didn't bring any bodyguards or the like. If it was just you and those 10 delicate little girls, I was afraid that you would suffer losses at sea." Although this was what he said, Moses Adams knew that Zhang Hai wasn't going to play this time. It was very likely that he was going to receive the armor. Moses Adams didn't know who he received these things from, but he knew that the place with these things was definitely not a good place. It was still necessary to let Zhang Hai be more vigilant. Hearing Moses Adams's words, Zhang Hai also knew what he was thinking, but some things were destined to be impossible to say. So he could only accept his kindness. Besides, he really didn't play with these things. Touching the Barrett M107 in the big bag, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. He suddenly hoped that someone would rob him at sea. Otherwise, wouldn't he have taken these guns for nothing? Early the next morning, Jiang Hai took Aphrodite and the other 10 girls, the car full of things, and the big bag to yesterday's port. But because Jiang Hai was going to leave the port today, his car also received permission to enter the port. Parking the car in front of his ship, Jiang Hai and the others began to put things on the ship. After more than an hour, they finally put everything in the car on the ship. Then, after Jiang Hai started the engine, Aphrodite untied the rope tied to the dock and jumped onto the ship. This luxurious yacht that was just bought yesterday slowly drove towards the sea with the sound of its own engine. As the ship left the dock, it gradually increased its speed. Although the speed of this ship wasn't as fast as a speedboat, it wasn't too far behind. After all, it was so expensive and the ship wasn't very big to begin with. After entering the sea, the speed at which it drove was still very satisfying. Chapter 301. Jiang, here's a drink and some roasted meat for you. Holding a glass of juice and a plate of roasted beef, Aphrodite walked into the captain's cabin and looked at Jiang Hai, who was looking at the GPS while steering the ship. After boarding the ship, Aphrodite and the others returned to their respective rooms. The rooms on this ship were definitely not enough for each of them, so they naturally lived together. Except for Jiang Hai, who lived alone, the others had at least 2 people to a room. Fortunately, they didn't mind. After putting their luggage in the room, they went to change into their swimsuits. Although the ship was still sailing and they couldn't swim in the sea, it didn't prevent them from playing on the deck. Unknowingly, it was noon, so they began to make lunch on the deck. Coming out to play naturally couldn't be like playing at home. Although the ship's kitchen was very complete, they still had to roast the roasted meat. However, they still prepared to eat the barbecued meat. Based on the current situation, they had already lit the fire and roasted it well. Oh, thank you. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai first set the GPS route, then turned his head and smiled at Aphrodite. But when he saw her, the smile on his face couldn't help but stiffen. Because Aphrodite was wearing the bikini she wore at the beach that day. Jiang Hai had already seen this figure, but when he saw this outfit, he couldn't help but remember what happened that day. If it wasn't for that damn Qin Feng who came out to make trouble that day, something great might have happened between him and this beauty in front of him. Let's eat something first. Seeing Jiang Hai's stunned look and fiery gaze, Aphrodite's face couldn't help but blush. She was a little shy now, but she still liked how Jiang Hai looked at her. She deliberately took 2 steps forward, straightened her figure, and whispered to Jiang Hai. She liked how Jiang Hai looked at her. Oh, thank you. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai snapped out of his memories and couldn't help but smile awkwardly at her. Then, he took the juice and roasted meat. Jiang Hai didn't know if it was intentional, but when he took it, his hand naturally touched Aphrodite's. This made Aphrodite's face even redder, but unfortunately, Jiang Hai didn't go any further. Instead, he took these 2 things back to the chair and sat down to eat. He had to admit that although it wasn't the beef from his manor, these girls' roasted meat was much better than his. At least, the taste was quite good. Seeing Jiang Hai sitting on the captain's chair and eating the meat with relish, Aphrodite didn't leave. Instead, she sat directly in the chair opposite Jiang Hai and stared at Jiang Hai in a daze. To be honest, Jiang Hai's position in her heart had always been very strange. She really liked Jiang Hai, but this kind of like wasn't love. Because although she had recovered to her best state, she still felt very dirty. She didn't deserve Jiang Hai. Not to mention a wife, she didn't even deserve a lover. Aphrodite only wanted to be Jiang Hai's maid, servant, and subordinate. She wanted to help him do things that he needed her to do. As for mental work, she couldn't help Jiang Hai. She was very clear about her physical strength, and she wasn't very good at it either. In a situation where both her mental and physical strength were lacking, offering herself might be the best choice. But in the face of her repeated hints, Jiang Hai had always kept his distance. She could feel that Jiang Hai was impulsive towards her, but for some reason, he was always able to control his impulses. She knew that Jiang Hai was afraid of hurting her, but she wanted Jiang Hai to hurt her. She had to admit that Jiang Hai really didn't have much talent in these matters. You guys are really good. What are you roasting now? With Jiang Hai's appetite, the plate of barbecued meat in front of him was quickly devoured by him. Zhang Hai licked the sauce on his lips as if he hadn't had enough, and asked in satisfaction. We're roasting chicken meat right now. Our level is actually quite average, but the roasting oven here uses charcoal so the taste is better than the one in the oven. Add to that the scenery. What we eat isn't the most important thing. Aphrodite explained to Zhang Hai when she heard Zhang Hai's words. Zhang Hai also smiled as he looked outside the window. Zhang Hai's gaze was currently fixed on the scenery outside. The blue sky, white clouds, and the sea as blue as the blue sky. Add to that the warm sunlight, and it was indeed very attractive. Aren't you going out to play with us? After cleaning up Zhang Hai's plate and cup, Aphrodite hesitated for a bit before asking Zhang Hai. She rather hoped that Zhang Hai would come out with them. I won't. I'm going to stay here and watch the target's location. You guys have fun. However, Zhang Hai shook his head when he heard her words. He actually really wanted to see the firm skin of those beauties outside. However, he still had things to do right now. Aphrodite could only shrug her shoulders when she heard Zhang Hai's words. Her upper body bounced a couple of times before she took the plate and cup and left. Then I'll bring you food later. Looking at Aphrodite's departing figure, Zhang Hai couldn't help but smack his lips. Although he was a bit slow, how could he not know Aphrodite's feelings? In fact, it wasn't just Aphrodite. Dinah Taylor, Hilda Leonard, Peggy Hall, Shira Rodney, Odelia Cliff, Bridget Nelson, and Janice Joy. These 8 girls' thoughts were basically the same. He didn't know if it was because they really liked him, or if it was just to repay his kindness. If Zhang Hai wanted to do something with them now, they definitely wouldn't refuse and would instead take the initiative to stick to him. Just like what Aphrodite said when she was joking, they wouldn't mind if the 8 of them did it together. However, Zhang Hai would mind. Although he wasn't a gentleman, he wouldn't hesitate when it came to hunting. But after all, he was going to get married and have children in the future. Aphrodite, Dinah, and the other girls, if nothing unexpected happened, would probably stay in his manor for the rest of their lives. He couldn't give them any status. However, if something really happened, not to mention the awkwardness after the 2 sides met, just his future wife might not be able to accept such a situation. However, if something happened, Zhang Hai couldn't chase them away and let them go somewhere else. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Hai was obviously a rabbit that didn't eat the grass near its burrow. He wasn't a very brave person and was especially conflicted. However, to be honest, Zhang Hai was also very depressed in his heart when faced with the temptations of these girls all day long. There were beauties asking you to come, but you were still in a state where you wanted to come, yet you couldn't. How depressing was that? In the past few days, the time he troubled Little left and right at night was clearly more frequent than when he was in Winthrop. Originally, he wanted to find the front desk to have some fun, but these girls were watching him so closely that it was really difficult for him to do so. Beep 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 beep. Just as Zhang Hai was thinking about the curves of these girls, to the point that even his big brother had some reaction, the satellite GPS in front of him couldn't help but ring. On the vast sea, there were no strong winds, but it was very easy to get lost while sailing on the sea. Zhang Hai's target this time wasn't any land, nor was it any small island. There were no points of reference, just an ocean. When there was only Zhang Hai, it didn't matter. He just had to head towards this point and gallop under the sea. However, now that the ship had set sail, Zhang Hai needed to avoid those big ships, cargo ships, and the like. At the same time, he also needed to not deviate from the route. Therefore, there was no way to set the ship on autopilot. He could only make adjustments here and there every now and then. This was also the fundamental reason why he didn't go out to play with those girls. Fortunately, after a few hours of sailing, Zhang Hai finally arrived at his target. According to the coordinates on the GPS, if nothing unexpected happened, his ship was now above the crack. The sonar at the bottom of the ship also proved Zhang Hai's conjecture. The bottomless image below made Zhang Hai grin. He had already completed the first step. Although the ship wasn't slow, it still took a lot of time. Casually drifting away from the crack, Zhang Hai stopped the ship and breathed a sigh of relief. Next, he had to prepare for the operation at night. This time, he wasn't just going to get the set of armor. In addition to that set of armor, Zhang Hai also wasn't going to let go of the jewelry worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Looking at the numbers that kept echoing back in the sonar, Zhang Hai also left the captain's cabin and walked back to his room. He needed to see if he had prepared enough things first. After confirming everything, Zhang Hai left the cabin. "Hey Zhang Hai, you're here." Seeing Zhang Hai coming out, Daliana couldn't help but smile and ask, "I feel that the ship has stopped. Are we there yet?" Hearing Daliana's words, Marian also raised her head and asked Zhang Hai. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai also nodded and said, "Oh, let's play here today and spend the night here. We'll go back tomorrow." Patting the heads of the two girls, Zhang Hai explained with a smile. He had work to do tonight. Although they didn't understand what Zhang Hai wanted to do, this didn't stop them from being very obedient. They also knew that they came here to play, but Zhang Hai didn't come here to play. He had important things to do. Chapter 302. Guns. No problem. Spear guns, no problem. Protective clothing. No problem. Stab-resistant clothing. No problem. Looking at the things on the bed in front of him, Zhang Hai couldn't help but whisper. This afternoon, he played with Delina and the others for the whole afternoon. He had to admit that playing with these girls always passed very quickly. Unknowingly, it was already night time. At night, Zhang Hai and the others specially cooked a pot of seafood porridge. After all, the barbecue grill didn't stop in the afternoon. It can be said that they ate for the whole day. It would be strange if they could eat in the evening. So at night, they only ate some porridge. After eating dinner, it was only 8 o'clock. Zhang Hai drove them back to their room and told them that no matter what they heard outside, they shouldn't come out unless Zhang Hai called them. There was a separate bathroom in these rooms. Zhang Hai also specially prepared snacks and water for them, so they really didn't need to come out. After listening to Zhang Hai's words, Aphrodite and the others didn't ask why. Because they simply didn't want to know, nor did they want to understand why Zhang Hai was like this. The only thing they needed to do was to listen to Zhang Hai. Even if Zhang Hai said that the sky was the moon during the day and the sky was the sun at night, they would still firmly stand on Zhang Hai's side. This was their insistence. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Hai brought them here and not Moses Adams. After the girls entered the room, Zhang Hai also took out the things he had prepared for himself. Most of the things in front were the same as last time, but in addition, Zhang Hai also brought a lot of bags, a very long rope with metal wires inside, and a big bottle of oxygen. If someone was here, they would be very surprised. It's understandable to bring bags, after all, they have to carry things. But the oxygen tank and the rope were a bit puzzling. But obviously, Zhang Hai didn't want to explain to the narrator, so he just carried these things and walked out of the cabin. After looking around and seeing that there were no other boats, Zhang Hai fastened one end of the rope to the boat with a metal buckle. Then he jumped into the sea with the rope and the big pile of things. Hearing the splashing sound of Zhang Hai jumping into the sea, Aphrodite and the others were worried. But just like what Zhang Hai said, they didn't come out and continued to stay in the room. This time, Zhang Hai didn't use the underwater engine because there was really no need for it, because the oxygen tank on his body was enough to make him sink. Once in the sea, Zhang Hai quickly sank down with the rope. The sea had buoyancy, but this buoyancy could only slow down Zhang Hai's speed. More than 1,000 meters, Zhang Hai was already familiar with it. Anyway, Zhang Hai ignored the water pressure, he didn't care about the diving speed, and he didn't need to breathe. After entering the water, his diving speed was still very fast. A few minutes passed in the blink of an eye, and Zhang Hai had already dived to a depth of a few hundred meters. He needed to be careful here. Although he ignored the water pressure, he still needed to be careful in the deep sea. If there was a giant squid or something like that, he would be able to react. Fortunately, he didn't encounter such an unlucky thing. Soon, Zhang Hai arrived right above the sunken ship he saw last time. He glanced at the cliffs on both sides. They were still covered with giant deep-sea lice. This time, Zhang Hai was much calmer. He knew that these things were harmless. Although they still looked a little disgusting. He still swung over lightly and climbed onto the ship from the cliff. The rope was also fastened to the ship by Zhang Hai with a metal buckle. After making sure that the rope was fixed, Zhang Hai left the oxygen tank here. He held 2 weapons in his hands and moved towards the cabin. He looked as careful as before. In a place like this, there was always nothing wrong with being careful. Although the last time he came here was only a few days ago, in the past few days, perhaps because of Zhang Hai's intrusion, There were a lot of sea creatures in this cabin. However, these sea creatures didn't pose any threat to Jiang Hai except for their ugly appearance. While gently moving towards the third floor, Jiang Hai lightly bypassed these creatures. Not long after, Jiang Hai had already arrived at the two warehouses on the third floor. The squid that was originally pinned to the wall by Jiang Hai had disappeared, but Jiang Hai's arrow was still there. He didn't know whether the squid escaped or was eaten clean by these deep-sea fishes. Anyway, this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. He came here to make money. First, he used his cane to gently pick up the gems. Jiang Hai was afraid that there would be creatures in this pile of treasures. Fortunately, there were no animals here. With this thought, Jiang Hai gently picked up the gems. There were no other things inside except for the gems. Then Jiang Hai began to pick them up. Now he didn't classify them, but directly put them in his bag. Not long after, a black bag was full. Jiang Hai didn't continue to put it in because his bag was originally very big. If this bag was placed on the shore, it would weigh more than 200 pounds, and it wouldn't be light underwater because of its buoyancy. More than 200 pounds wasn't a big problem for Jiang Hai, who was twice the limit of human fitness. However, the strength of this ship was limited, so Jiang Hai just put this bag and returned to the deck. At this time, the oxygen tank came in handy. Jiang Hai took out another bag and tied it to the other side of the bag. At the same time, he tied the bag to the rope. Then he began to inject oxygen into the sealed bag. When a certain amount of oxygen was injected, the bag was tied tightly. Then the balloon made by Jiang Hai carried the bag of more than 200 pounds of gems along the rope fixed by Jiang Hai and slowly floated to the sea surface. After confirming that there was no problem with the bag, Jiang Hai returned to the cabin and began to put other things in. This was Jiang Hai's method. Although it seemed a bit stupid, it was a good method. Jiang Hai didn't have any special ability to command the creatures in the deep sea to serve him, so he could only think of a stupid way to send these things up. Although there was some risk in doing so, the risk was still within Jiang Hai's acceptable range. Then he returned to the cabin again and put another bag on the plate armor. Jiang Hai planned to take away all the gold, silver, and jewelry in the warehouse. When Jiang Hai first looked at it, he felt that there was about a ton of them. But when he packed it up, he realized that he had underestimated the warehouse. It was almost filled to the brim with more than a ton of treasures. Fortunately, Jiang Hai had prepared enough. Jiang Hai's big bag filled 14 bags before he could take away all these things. According to the calculation of 200 pounds per bag, or 100 kilograms per bag, 14 bags meant a total of 1,400 kilograms. In total, it weighed 1.5 tons. Moreover, Jiang Hai would pack more every time. 200 pounds more and no less. Last time, Jiang Hai brought back more than 8 kilograms of gems, which were sold for more than $2 million. Of course, these gems were sold by the kilograms, not by the kilograms, but that didn't stop Jiang Hai from calculating. 1,500 kilograms. According to the calculation that 10 kilograms could be sold for $3 million, these gems were worth a total of $450 million. Of course, there would be some discount because there were a lot of gold coins above, but most of the money below was silver coins. But if he sold it, at least half the price would be, which was more than $200 million. Thinking of this, the corners of Jiang Hai's mouth unconsciously opened again. Who would complain about having too much money? At least he wouldn't. From 8 o'clock in the evening, when the sky was completely dark, Jiang Hai began to get busy. Unknowingly, he was busy until 2 o'clock in the morning. At this time, the treasures in the warehouse had been moved to the surface of the sea by Jiang Hai. Next was the armor in the last warehouse. Jiang Hai reorganized his equipment and walked to another room. But when he opened the door of the warehouse, a creature appeared in front of Jiang Hai's eyes. Shock, shock. Looking at the guy in front of him who was wandering back and forth in this small room at this time, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roar subconsciously. Of course, his voice couldn't be heard at the bottom of the sea, but the movement of the water here also startled the shark. Its big head turned, and a pair of emotionless eyes were already staring at Jiang Hai. At this time, there was only one kind of shark here, the six-jaw shark, a common shark in the deep sea. It was a creature that had just been discovered by humans recently. It had evolved to its current form 200 million years ago, and had lived for 200 million years. It was definitely a living creature. Jiang Hai had already checked this creature before coming. Its main food was squid, cephalopods, shrimp, crabs, and other crustaceans, all kinds of fish and marine mammals. Unless it was provoked, it usually wouldn't attack humans. Great white sharks usually wouldn't take the initiative to attack humans. But how many chances of survival were there when encountering a great white shark in the sea? Unless it was provoked? I wonder if being hungry counts as being enraged? This six-jawed shark was about 5 meters long. How did it enter this small cabin? Zhang Hai was not clear about it. But Zhang Hai knew very well that this shark didn't look friendly and was even full of malice. At the moment when their eyes met, Zhang Hai was surprised, but for this shark, it was a surprise. Chapter 303. Whew! Although no sound could be heard underwater, the sound of water flowing when the shark swung its tail still entered Zhang Hai's ears. Then the shark rushed straight towards Zhang Hai like an arrow, as if it really saw its prey. Its bloody mouth full of sharp teeth also opened at this time. Looking at the shark rushing in front of him, Zhang Hai panicked, but he didn't lose his mind. He already knew how to deal with sharks before he came down. If he encountered a 10-meter-long great white shark, a 10-meter-long deep-sea squid, a 10-meter-long sperm whale, or a killer whale, Zhang Hai may not have many ways to deal with it. But a 5-meter-long shark? Well, Zhang Hai did not have many ways to deal with it, but maybe because of the dragon tattoo on his body, Zhang Hai was particularly calm at this critical moment. According to what he learned on the internet, Zhang Hai directly punched out. The huge force even caused a bubble to form in the airless deep sea. The powerful force, coupled with the black net around the fist, directly hit the shark's nose. When attacked by a shark, there are two weaknesses of a shark. One is its nose, because a shark's nose is the most sensitive object in the world, hundreds of times more flexible than a dog's nose. A 1-meter-long shark can monitor the sea area within a few kilometers. It is precisely because of this that a shark's nose has a lot of nerve endings. It is very sensitive but also very fragile. So if you are bitten by a shark, hit its nose. There is a lot of chance that it will let go. Another weakness is its eyes. Sharks have no eyelids, only eyelids, so its eyes are very easy to destroy. So when attacked by a shark, hitting its eyes is also a good choice. Of course, in addition to this, sharks have another weakness, its gills. In the diet of sharks, the most important thing is sea turtles. When a sea turtle faces a shark, its main target is its gills. As long as it bites the shark's gills, the shark will be finished. But for humans, this weakness isn't very good. But even if the cheeks were wrong, the nose and eyes were definitely correct. Zhang Hai went up and punched him. The heavy blow landed on the shark's nose. In an instant, the shark went crazy. It swung its head and wanted to swim away. However, was Zhang Hai that easy to talk to? At this time, his other hand had already reacted and readied the spear gun. As Zhang Hai pulled the trigger, a sharp arrow instantly penetrated the body of the six-jaw shark. Pang pang. However, Zhang Hai's technique was not very good in a hurry. This arrow was slightly off target and only pierced the abdomen of the six-maned shark. Blood instantly flowed out, and the shark also struggled hard. But no matter how hard it struggled, it couldn't get the arrow out. The arrow of a spear gun was used to catch whales, so it was full of barbs. It was impossible for the shark to get it out on its own. The crazy shark kept hitting the deck of the boat with its body. For a while, the whole boat was shaking. This startled Zhang Hai. One must know that if the boat fell, then he would be fine, and the treasures could be ignored for the time being. But don't forget, this boat was tied to his yacht, and there were also 10 girls on it. Zhang Hai didn't bring them out to hide at the bottom of the sea. Looking at the crazy shark, Zhang Hai, who had already dodged to the side, had to grit his teeth. If he didn't kill this shark at this time, he would be the one who died. Immediately, he pulled out another spear gun. Zhang Hai loaded it in an instant and shot again. This time, Zhang Hai shot directly from the left rib of the shark and pierced the shark. Although 2 of the shark's vital points were damaged, the shark was not dead yet. It was still struggling there. Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai didn't have the leisure and time to care about it. He took a step and instantly came in front of the shark. At the same time, he also took out the pistol that had been behind him. The shark saw Zhang Hai in front of it. Although it was difficult for it to understand what mutual destruction meant, it was because of this reason. So, it also opened its big mouth and bit Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai looked at its big mouth and didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward. One of his hands directly reached into the shark's mouth. When the shark's big mouth bit down, Jiang Hai's arm, which was wearing a stab vest, felt a sharp pain. Fortunately, the shark's bite was not strong enough. It didn't bite through Jiang Hai's clothes. Jiang Hai had already entered the shark's weak point. With a pistol in his hand, Jiang Hai was in the shark's mouth. He aimed at the shark's brain and pulled the trigger. Bang 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 bang. With 5 consecutive shots, Jiang Hai had already fired all the bullets of the underwater pistol. After eating these 5 bullets, the shark's body finally couldn't bear it anymore. Its body unconsciously turned over and sank down with thick blood. Feeling that the shark was dead, Jiang Hai couldn't help but breathe a long sigh of relief. Bang! But just as Jiang Hai breathed a sigh of relief, the shark's body fell to the ground. The huge impact made the boat that was about to turn over because of the shark, and the tilting strength increased again. Not good. Feeling the direction of the boat, Jiang Hai couldn't help but mutter with a headache. He instantly opened the chest containing the armor beside him. Fortunately, the armor wasn't damaged in this incident. Then, he directly drilled through the hole in the ship's warehouse and out of the ship. Looking outside the boat, Jiang Hai found that the boat that was originally stuck here had tilted to 45 degrees and seemed to be continuing to tilt forward. If this continued, the boat would probably sink to the bottom of the sea in an instant. Now it was a race against time. If the boat really collapsed, then his small yacht would probably be pulled down by the boat in an instant. At this time, Aphrodite and the others on the sea were also very surprised because the boat kept tilting to one side, which surprised them. But thinking of Jiang Hai's words, they didn't leave the room. They just prayed that Jiang Hai would come back soon. If Jiang Hai knew that his orders would put these girls in danger, he would rather not bring these girls here. But it was too late to say this now. What Jiang Hai needed to do the most now was to untie or break the rope. Seeing this, Jiang Hai had a rare motivation and his body suddenly swam faster. In a few strokes, he had already reached the plate armor of the tilted boat. Looking at the rope in front of him, Jiang Hai immediately pulled out the dagger he had been carrying and cut the rope in front of him. But after cutting a few times, Jiang Hai found that he was a little too naive. Because he was afraid that the rope would break, Jiang Hai specially bought the thickest rope with steel wires inside. It was impossible to cut this kind of rope with a dagger in less than 10 minutes. But now, let alone 10 minutes, it might not even last a minute. Just as Jiang Hai was a little worried, he suddenly saw the piece of wood tied to the rope. I'm so stupid. Compared to the rope, this piece of wood that had been soaked in the sea for nearly 400 years was naturally easier to deal with. Jiang Hai went up without saying anything and directly kicked it. Just as Jiang Hai thought, perhaps this piece of wood was extremely strong 400 years ago, but now it was very difficult to withstand Jiang Hai's kick. In an instant, the wood on one side of the boat broke. Then Jiang Hai exerted force and pulled the rope to the other side. With a kacha sound, the wood that was originally tied to the rope was kicked into 2 pieces by Jiang Hai. At this moment, the 2 sides of the trench could no longer bear the weight of the boat. It tilted to the left and fell into the deepest part of the trench. Jiang Hai's oxygen tank, spear, and so on also fell down like this. Although he was a little emotional, Jiang Hai finally solved this problem. This made him, who was holding the rope, couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Then he tied the armor in his hand to his body and threw the remaining wood into the sea. Then Jiang Hai used his arms to climb forward. A distance of more than 1,000 meters, if it was on land, Jiang Hai could easily climb, but it was easier to climb in the sea because of the buoyancy. It took a few minutes to go down, but it took less time to come up. After about 5 or 6 minutes of climbing, Jiang Hai's headlight had already shone on the bottom of his yacht. There were many huge bags around his yacht. Looking at these things, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be happy. This time he made a lot of money. Puff! With a splash, Jiang Hai finally emerged from the bottom of the sea. Although this deep-sea adventure had a lot of gains, it also scared Jiang Hai. First of all, he almost caused the people on the boat to fall into the sea. Secondly, there was the problem of the shark. If Jiang Hai wasn't lucky, he might have died in the deep sea this time. Although the treasure was good, sometimes you have to pay attention to it to see if you can live to spend it. Bang! Returning to the boat, Jiang Hai first sat on the deck and rested for half a day. These few hours also tired him out. The physical tiredness was secondary. The mental tiredness was really very tiring. After about half an hour, Jiang Hai sat up from the ground again. He first threw the armor back to his room, then changed into a new set of clothes and called Aphrodite and the others. The boat shook so much just now, is it okay? As soon as the door opened, Aphrodite looked at Jiang Hai and asked anxiously. It's okay, I made you worry, but now it's time for us to harvest. Hearing Aphrodite's words, Jiang Hai smiled a little embarrassedly, but then looked at her seriously. Now is indeed the time for harvest. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.